Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. Only the overwhelming mana that had been drawn together remained entirely genuine and unmasked. 'Tis a ruinous dream I cannot bear to see. No recompense, no salvation to be had. At the world's end, a bird sings of tomorrow. Let this be a sign. Morgan, seated upon the throne, spoke coldly. The aurora-draped sky rippled with black waves, and from within those ripples, lances of azure mana rained down. Artoria recognized them immediately. Each spear was identical to the one that had struck at her on the sea the day before. One after another, the spears fell. Impaling tentacles that sought to reach Morgan, those that extended outward, and even the massive body of the sea demon itself. Roadless Camelot, the now unreachable utopia. Mana surged. A roar like the heavens themselves splitting open echoed across the battlefield. The Witch of Britannia unleashed all the mana she had gathered in one mighty blast. The frigid, gleaming flare that erupted illuminated both the sea demon and the aurora-filled sky. In an instant, the river water vaporized. Every inch, every fragment, every molecule of the immense creature, once a symbol of terror, was fully exposed to the searing cold light. It let out a voiceless shriek, shredded under the merciless impact. The sea demon was obliterated piece by piece, until its exposed core revealed the location of Castor. In the very next moment, the Magus was swallowed whole by the cascade of light. Towering waves surged toward the riverbanks on either side, crashing into the embankments before gradually pulling back. As the light faded and the aurora dissolved, only Morgan remained, standing motionless atop the gently rippling surface of the Mayan River. Shiomi's eyes narrowed in alarm, and in a flash, he was at Morgan's side, catching her just as she began to collapse backward. Artoria stood still, gazing at the fading afterglow of the noble phantasm. She reached out toward a point of falling light, but it vanished before it could touch her palm. Roadless Camelot. She stared at Morgan in Shiomi's arms and softly repeated the noble phantasm's name. Chapter 53, The Queen of Winter's little amusement. In truth, Morgan hadn't expended that much energy. At most, if she were to activate her noble phantasm a second time, its efficiency would dip slightly. She had only pulled that little stunt on a whim after settling the battle. But then Shiomi reacted exactly as she expected, catching her the instant she began to fall back. Hey! Are you alright? Shiomi asked, a bit nervously. He assumed she had burned through too much mana and couldn't maintain her footing. I overexerted myself a little. Can't really stand steadily, Morgan replied coolly, completely unfazed. I don't think I can make it home on my own. I'll be needing a lift. From my husband. Then just to materialize and rest in spirit form. Shiomi offered reflexively, but before he could finish, he felt a sharp pinch on his arm. Even with his body tempered by Skathak's relentless training, that E-rank endurance still packed a painful sting. My endurance is only E, remember? I'd fall apart like that, Morgan said flatly. Shiomi paused, puzzled. Was she acting spoiled just because they won? Either way, whenever Morgan behaved like this, he found it oddly difficult to get annoyed. Maybe it was because she was absurdly beautiful? Somehow, nothing felt out of place. Which was a problem. Shouldn't his heart belong solely to his mentor? Just now. Were you thinking about another woman? Morgan asked again. Shiomi nearly lost his footing. No. Absolutely not. Shaking off the intrusive thoughts, he scooped Morgan into a bridal carry and headed toward the shore. She cooperated smoothly, reverting from her battle gear to her usual outfit. Come to think of it, I only ever bought you this one outfit. When we've got time, I should pick up a few more, Shiomi said as they walked. Cradled in his arms like a princess, Morgan responded naturally, whatever you say. As they neared the riverbank, Shiomi asked, earlier you said the Fuiuki Grail had gone mad. That's not just a bluff to mislead the other factions, right? I'm not interested in schemes. Crushing my enemies with sheer force suits me better, Morgan replied. Well, that's going to be a real pain. Shiomi muttered. Mission update, Mr. Little Devil Navigator? Now that you've learned the truth about the Fuiuki Grail, your mission is going to change. Receiving the updated mission, Xiaomi came to a halt. The all-too-familiar system prompt had returned. And with it, a fresh headache. What's wrong? I want to change our approach regarding the Holy Grail. Xiaomi looked down at Morgan in his arms and spoke with quiet resolve. Morgan looked slightly surprised after hearing him out, but offered no objections. She simply nodded silently in agreement. When the two returned to the embankment, Xiaomi noticed another issue. The thick fog Morgan had conjured still showed no signs of dissipating. If someone tried to expose her now, she wouldn't be able to keep up the act. Still, seeing how much she was enjoying it, Xiaomi decided he might as well play along too. After all, Morgan wasn't heavy, and having such a soft, cool beauty nestled in his arms wasn't exactly a bad deal. Thank you for your hard work, Xiaomi-kun. And Lady Witch, said Tokiomi, offering his gratitude. It's a relief to see things resolved so swiftly. With that, the reward for defeating Castor would now fall to Xiaomi. Not that Tokiomi had much choice. Things had progressed beyond his expectations. He hadn't anticipated Castor causing such chaos. Had it not been for Tenkai Xiaomi's servant handling things in time, the sheer amount of effort needed to cover up the incident would have left Tokiomi with a splitting headache. It's nothing. Since the Holy Church issued a call, we simply responded accordingly, Xiaomi answered calmly. But with the Holy Grail War reaching this point, I doubt I'm the only one caught off guard. Mr. Tokiomi, the Insburn family, the church. None of you saw this coming either, did you? As he spoke, he glanced toward Iris-Veel. As one of the two founding families still active in the war, and having witnessed the operation against Castor firsthand, Iris-Veel was now also reflecting on the things Morgan had said earlier. They had just collected the remnants of Castor's defeated soul, making this the second such recovery. Though she remained standing, Iris-Veel could already feel her physical functions deteriorating further. I'm deeply ashamed, Tokiomi admitted. So then, Mr. Xiaomi, what do you propose? Asked Iris-Veel. Xiaomi looked around at the others. Waver among them. And considered the remaining masters. Including himself, and Kairai who remained hidden, all identities were accounted for. I wouldn't call it a proposal. But there is something crucial regarding the Holy Grail War that must be discussed face to face with all remaining masters and their servants, Xiaomi said. Tomorrow at noon, we'll convene at the church to reveal the hidden issues behind this Grail War and decide, together, where it should go from here. The unexpected announcement left Tokiomi momentarily stunned. Of course, he knew the inner workings of the Holy Grail War. If the Grail were merely a wish-granting device, then defeating the other 6 masters and servants would suffice. But as a tool meant to reach the root, the 7th servant must also be slain. That was why Tokiomi had placed such importance on the command spells, even conspiring with the church to organize the operation against Castor. Though in the end, thanks to Gilgamesh's lack of cooperation, the credit went to Tenkai Xiaomi. Don't be so tense, Magus of this land. We're not discussing the core mechanics. But the underlying problems, Morgan said, still nestled in Xiaomi's arms, yet exuding an undeniable authority. Even if it looked a little absurd to everyone else. Tokiomi immediately understood and relaxed slightly. Very well then, let's go with your suggestion, Xiaomi-kun, he agreed. If it was about hidden problems, it was worth hearing out. Whether it turned out to be nonsense or not. No helping it, guess we'll see what this is about, Waver added, arms crossed, accepting the proposal. Like Iris-Veel, he had heard what Morgan said at the banquet. So of course, he was concerned. The Insburn will attend as well, Iris-Veel said. Xiaomi, already walking down the far side of the embankment, stopped in his tracks and looked back at Iris-Veel with a meaningful glance before driving off with Morgan. The look gave Iris-Veel pause. If Saber's true master didn't show up tomorrow, they would refuse to share anything. It looked like Garetsugu would have to make an appearance. Otherwise, from every angle, he would be excluded from what came next. And possibly end up as the common enemy of every other faction. Chapter 54, A moment's respite. After finishing the battle at Mayan River, Xiaomi returned home and remembered the banquet remnants still scattered across the courtyard. With a sigh, he had no choice but to clean everything up in the middle of the night. Drenched in sweat again, he headed straight for the bathroom and took a second shower. When he came out, hair still slightly damp, he plopped onto the sofa and stared blankly at the ceiling. It was all his own doing. He muttered inwardly. Had he known it would end like this, he wouldn't have bothered playing the good host. He should have just let those kings drink cold sake on empty stomachs. It's not like servants can get food poisoning anyway. Thinking that, Xiaomi let out another long sigh. What kind of madness drove him to keep finding new ways to tire himself out? You've worked hard. Lie down and get some rest. Morgan's voice rang out beside him, reminding him that she had been sitting there in the living room, watching him rush around. As she spoke, Morgan pulled him down without giving him a choice, resting his head on her soft thighs. A cool, faint scent lingered at his nose. Unexpectedly soothing, almost hypnotic. Sigh. Shiomi let out a weary breath without thinking. Even with mana sustaining him, he hadn't slept in over 2 days. He'd also had some alcohol earlier. If he wasn't sleepy by now, it'd be worth checking if something was wrong with him. Worse yet, he just remembered. He'd driven drunk. Luckily, there was no one on the road and no police checks. By the time Shiomi drove back, the thick fog had already blanketed all of Fuyuki. He'd taken it slow on the way and used the time to ask Morgan about the status of the Greater Grail. Still, you're amazing. Changing the weather and covering all of Fuyuki like that, Shiomi said, almost absent-mindedly. Even you could have done it, if you wanted to, Morgan replied calmly. Besides, the fog's completely out of my control now and has lost all magical properties. It should dissipate sometime after midnight. I wonder if the news will talk about it tomorrow, Shiomi chuckled. Something like, an unexplained weather anomaly, and maybe it'll go down as one of Fuyuki's mysterious phenomena. As his nerves finally unwound, the alcohol started to hit, and his eyelids began to droop. Shiomi, who used to be a complete teetotaler, wasn't even sure if he had a decent tolerance. Come to think of it, when Gilgamesh left, he just left the whole set of wine behind. Eyes half closed, he mumbled a complaint to Morgan. The wine was excellent, and the set was genuine gold. Judging by the color, definitely from the 5th dynasty of Ruk. You're not going to return it? Finders keepers. It's not like I'm some saint who doesn't care about money, Shiomi said with a casual smile. Morgan smiled too. Then don't return it. Then, as if stroking a pet, she gently ran her fingers through Shiomi's soft hair. About the Master of Caster, the one I executed before you came to back me up. Yeah? What about him? Shiomi hadn't thought much about it, assuming the matter was already settled. When I found him, he'd already been taken over, Morgan said. Another Magus had intervened in secret. I didn't look into it too deeply, but it was clearly some kind of brain invasion using insects. Silently tampering with his cognitive function. At that, Shiomi felt her body tense slightly, like a bow drawn taut. Through their physical contact, he could sense an almost imperceptible emotion leaking through. Disgust, fear. Or maybe just discomfort. She's really not good with bugs, huh? Shiomi thought. He reached up and clasped the hand that had been playing with his hair, holding it firmly to pass on his warmth, to say, I'm here. Only then did that faint tension ease, and her usual calm reasserted itself. That's Skinmatu again? Shiomi didn't press the issue, but quietly continued the conversation. That's right. Shiomi pieced it together. So, in the end, the Matu family's magecraft, unable to continue due to incompatibility with the land, had no heir qualified to enter this Holy Grail war. That old man had no choice but to intervene himself and try to snatch it from the sidelines. Strictly speaking, there was still Karaya Matu, a descendant with a trace of magical aptitude. But Karaya had long since left the Matu household, having grown to despise the path of magecraft. Just before the Holy Grail War began, he had wrapped up a short stay in Fuyuki and set off abroad again, continuing his research travels. At this rate, the Matu lineage would inevitably die out, and their magical legacy would vanish. No Magus would ever accept that fate willingly. Looks like that's how it is, Morgan said, having also learned about the Matu family from Shiomi. With no successor, and the head of the house surviving only through magecraft, it was obvious the Matu family wouldn't last until the next Grail War, 60 years later. It was no wonder Skinmatu was getting desperate. Still, it seemed Morgan's warning at the Greater Grail beneath Ritu Temple had worked. Skin had prepared well. Even though Morgan could easily sever his control over Inusuke Ryu, she couldn't trace it back through the magical channel to kill him directly. The semi-automated control method had made Ryu think his actions were his own. Even Caster hadn't noticed. And when Morgan disrupted the spell, the mana connection was already designed to cut off. In short, Skinmatu had been guarding specifically against someone like Morgan. A Magus from the Age of Gods who surpassed the standards of the modern era. Also, when I executed him, I confirmed that Caster's master had already used up all of his command spells, Morgan added. That's how the sea demon managed to act on such a large scale. It was being powered by command spell mana. He really knows how to cause us trouble, Shiomi muttered. Now that Caster's side has been defeated, among the remaining factions. He paused, thinking over the other masters. Eliminating the possibilities one by one, the only one left was Waver Velvet. That Magus, slightly younger than Shiomi, had handled things well in practice. But when it came down to magical ability, he was honestly quite weak. One-on-one against Skinmatu, he'd likely end up as prey. Rider's master, Morgan echoed his thoughts. But the king of conquerors isn't like other servants. He's not so easy to catch off guard. Who knows? Honestly, I don't have much intel on Skan Matu myself. Among Fuiuki's Magus families, Matu is even more discreet than Tasaka, Shiomi said after a moment. Looks like no matter how tomorrow's meeting turns out, we'll need to warn Rider and his master. If things stayed as they were, Shiomi wouldn't care how the factions chose to battle it out. But if the war dragged on and more servants were eliminated, reducing the souls required for the Greater Grail's activation, it would seriously jeopardize his current plan. If possible, we should keep the number of fallen servants to 4 or less, Morgan said. Shiomi's senses began to blur. Already worn out, thinking about the Holy Grail War now demanded more mental energy than expected. And drowsiness set in even faster. Sounds like we're betting on not losing, Shiomi said with a faint laugh. Morgan was silent for a while. Shiomi assumed she didn't want to answer and let sleep overtake them. If we fight separately, we'll lose. But if we fight together, we've always been invincible. By the time she said it, Shiomi was already asleep. Listening to his quiet, steady breathing, Morgan smiled softly. Chapter 55, Departure. I had a dream. The witch studied tirelessly, and the young man who called himself a sage spared no effort in teaching her everything he knew. Magecraft, martial arts, tactics, political strategy. The sage held nothing back. I had a dream. The witch crossed an island surrounded by sea on foot. Traveling, facing hardships, and offering salvation. Always by her side, never once falling behind, was the sage, his presence unchanged over 1,000 years. I had a dream. Then came the sound of something breaking. The witch disappeared, and the sage vanished without a trace. All that remained were the queen and a tyrant, at an endless war. When Shiomi opened his eyes, he found himself lying in bed. His sleeping posture was terrible. He looked like he'd been possessed by a vengeful spirit, sprawled out like a gecko under the covers, the bedsheets a complete mess. Through his disheveled bangs, Shiomi spotted the alarm clock on the nightstand. It was just over 30 minutes before noon. He'd slept for quite a while. What a cliched story. Really? Not funny at all. You don't look so good. Hungover? Came Morgan's voice. Only then did he realize she was sitting at the edge of the bed, tilting her head slightly to peer down at him, as if admiring a pet. My tolerance is pretty bad, sure, but I only had a little last night. Not enough to be hungover. Honestly, I slept pretty well, Shiomi replied. You the one who put me back in bed? Sleeping on the sofa isn't ideal, Morgan replied without denying it. Guess this is your return gift for last night. Shiomi chuckled to himself. Still, that habit of yours. Treating people like pets and watching them sleep. It's hard to compliment. Morgan didn't mind. It's nothing. Even when the master's asleep, the mana flow doesn't stop. A servant who doesn't need sleep has nothing else to do but kill time. I just didn't expect you to sleep in such a weird way. This is just how I look, Shiomi said with a self-deprecating laugh. Though really, he was never usually like this. If anything, it was probably due to the string of dreams. Vaguely connected yet utterly illogical. That left him feeling off. Not that he could say, it's your fault for showing me all that. If you're not feeling well, maybe we should cancel the trip to the Holy Church, Morgan said. Being in less than perfect condition could cost you your life in the Holy Grail War. No need, I'm fine, Shiomi said, sitting up. The longer we delay, the worse it'll get. I see. Good, Morgan didn't press the issue. You don't need to worry about Sakura and Karin. Sakura reheated the food you made last night and shared it with Karin for breakfast. Shiomi gave a quiet nod. Sakura was a thoughtful girl. Still, Shiomi didn't want her dealing with household responsibilities at such a young age. He only taught her how to do housework. Never actually asked her to do it. At most, she just helped out now and then. They wouldn't be at the Holy Church long. He should be back soon. It'd be fine to ease up a little on Sakura and Karin's routine today. Having made up his mind, he dropped by a nearby supermarket to pick up a few lunchboxes and left them at home. After washing up, Shiomi decided to skip the car and instead use transfer Magecraft with Morgan to arrive near Fuiuki Church. This area was always deserted, so even casting Magecraft during the day rarely attracted attention. With just a few minutes left before noon, Shiomi and Morgan made their way up the slope leading to the church's main entrance. Come to think of it, Morgan, you're not just good at Magecraft, are you? Said Shiomi. Morgan nodded. It's expected for a magus to excel at Magecraft, but thinking that's all we can do is far too narrow-minded. No wonder your magic spear never felt like just a close combat weapon, Shiomi added. Something about it catch your eye? At first glance, the design seems impractical. But once you actually wield it, It handles surprisingly well, Shiomi said, hands behind his back as he looked toward the church entrance slowly coming into view. The weight distribution is perfectly balanced. Even for a weapon forged purely from mana, on par with a noble phantasm, it's remarkably well crafted. Oh? Most people, if they weren't proficient with spears, would probably overlook that in the forging process. They'd just treat it as a means of self-defense or an extension of magecraft, Shiomi said, turning to Morgan with a smile. If you're that satisfied with it, feel free to use it whenever you need to on the battlefield, Morgan replied, eyes gently lowered to the stone path at her feet. Unlike your weapon, my spear can transform as needed. Into other forms, even into a long sword matching Artoria's holy sword in specification. Shiomi noticed the faint smile tugging at Morgan's lips. He could tell his words had lifted her mood. But it's true, I'm the kind who prefers fighting on the front lines, Shiomi said, glancing away. Still, if we end up in a split battle like the first night, wouldn't it be dangerous for you to face enemies unarmed? In a situation like that, I'd handle it appropriately. Morgan's reply subtly conveyed her hope that Shiomi wouldn't rely on the soaring spear of piercing death. Sounds like you've got a problem with that weapon of mine, Shiomi said bluntly. No, not at all, Morgan answered briskly. Though her averted gaze betrayed her true thoughts. Soon, they were standing outside the church doors. Through the open gates, the chapel was clearly visible. Even from where they stood, several auras filled with mana could be sensed. Both masters and servants were present. Tenkai Shiomi checked his watch. 1 minute to noon. Right on time. Good. I'm glad it's not like that, Shiomi said, lowering his wrist. It's not like I insist on using it. But I've got a feeling, no matter how things unfold, the King of Heroes will be standing in our way. So, Tenkai Shiomi knew he'd need the soaring spear of piercing death. A weapon honed to perfection, crafted solely for him. It would be indispensable in the battles to come. If the opponent is the King of Heroes, then it's understandable, Morgan said, looking at Shiomi. Even I wouldn't be so nitpicky with my own husband. It was the first time she'd referred to him that way, and rather than feeling awkward or resigned, Shiomi felt happy. Then, the two of them stepped into Fuiuki Church together. Chapter 56, Convergence for Rizaiko Tamine, Overseer of the Fourth Holy Grail War. The strain and complications of this war had far exceeded his expectations. Perhaps it was because he was no longer as young as he was 60 years ago, or perhaps it was because this war had introduced far more anomalies than any previous Holy Grail war. Castor's reckless actions caused such an uproar that not only the Holy Church but even the Mages Association had been forced to act behind the scenes. So when the old priest saw Tenkai Shiomi and Berserker push open the doors and step inside, his first instinct wasn't to offer a welcome, but to express gratitude. It was thanks to Berserker that, when Castor summoned that massive sea monster, the entire Mayan River area had been shrouded in thick fog. The fog continued to spread, eventually covering both Mama Town and Shinto. The low visibility did disrupt city functions somewhat, but it was extraordinarily effective in concealing any traces of the supernatural. Only a few quick-witted residents living along the riverbanks had caught a glimpse of Castor's spectacle. To everyone else, it simply looked like an unusually foggy evening. Because of this, both the Holy Church and the Mages Association had been spared considerable trouble. No matter how the war turned out, Shiomi's decisiveness in preserving the secrecy of magecraft had already earned him greater standing and credibility within the association as a magus. Shiomi-kun, welcome, said Rizaiko Tamine, offering his greeting as the head of the Fuiuki Church and overseer of the Holy Grail War. The clock had just struck noon. I was the one who requested this gathering from Mr. Tokiomi, so I'm grateful that the church is able to offer its support, Shiomi said, walking through the aisle between the pews until he stood before Father Rizai. As he moved, he scanned the room. Tokiomi, Tasaka and Gilgamesh were already there, seated separately on different benches. Iskander and Waver were present too. Unlike Gilgamesh, who sat coldly at the very front, ignoring everyone around him, Iskander was openly curious, observing the architecture and furnishings of the church as though he were touring a museum of antiquities. Also present were the pairs of Kairiko Tamine and Garrett Suguamiya. Kairai aside, the defeat of Assassin had been officially concealed. The church clearly intended to keep up the ruse. Shiomi could sense Kairai's presence behind the door that led from the chapel to the courtyard. But no trace of Assassin Zora. This matter you brought up is too serious to ignore. As Fuiuki's overseers, the Tasaka family cannot afford to stand by, Tokiomi said earnestly. After all, if things were truly as Shiomi claimed, if there were unknown issues with the Holy Grail, then the war would need to be halted, perhaps even cancelled entirely. Should it effective Grail manifest, and word of it reach the Mages Association operatives stationed in Fuiuki, the damage to the Tasaka family's reputation would be inevitable. That's good to hear, Shiomi replied with a nod, glancing around. I thought we'd be the last ones here, but looks like someone else is still late. Just as he finished speaking, the chapel doors swung open. A figure in a black trench coat appeared in the sunlight. Garetsugu Emiya. The moment Tokiomi saw him, his expression tightened briefly. He had assumed Garetsugu was merely a magus hired by the Insburn family to assist in the war, but now it seemed his initial suspicion had been correct all along. Garetsugu Emiya was the real master. The Insburn homunculus was only a front. Not that Tokiomi could criticize this. He himself was working covertly with the church and employing underhanded methods. Which meant that, in this entire war, the only masters conducting themselves with open transparency were Shiomi and Waver. After Garetsugu walked in, he let the door swing shut behind him. Only for it to be stopped a second time. Artoria entered right after him, her expression blank. That one moment said everything about the terrible state of their master-servant relationship. It made clear why Iris Veil had been acting as the nominal master. Garetsugu took a seat on a bench about 5 steps away from Shiomi. Saber, meanwhile, simply stood behind Morgan, slightly to the right. The only one visibly puzzled was Waver, who started to speak. But the King of Conquerors placed a hand on his shoulder, quietly stopping him. Well, looks like everyone's here. Shiomi glanced around at the gathered masters in the church, his gaze even subtly including Kairiko Tamine, who was eavesdropping behind the side door. Thank you all for accepting my invitation. As you've likely heard by now, the issue concerns the ultimate prize of this Holy Grail War. The so-called omnipotent wish-granting device. I believe there's a critical flaw in it, one that will harm all parties if kept secret. That's why I've chosen to make it public. As he spoke, his eyes swept naturally across the room, observing the other masters. Tokiomi and Waver were listening intently. Garetsugu, on the other hand, was watching with a look of thinly veiled contempt, as if thinking, let's see what kind of story you're trying to sell. Clearly, he didn't believe Tenkai Shiomi at all. He probably thought Shiomi was bluffing, trying to scare everyone into backing out of the war. At that moment, Morgan placed a hand on Shiomi's shoulder, silently signaling through thought speech that she would take over the explanation. Shiomi didn't object. After all, he'd only gotten a brief summary from Morgan on the way home the night before. If anyone had the clearest grasp of the situation, it was Morgan. She had gone into the cavern beneath the Great Grail herself and seen it firsthand. I'll explain from here. Unlike Shiomi's calm and sincere tone, Morgan's voice was cool and formal. Time is valuable, so I'll start with the conclusion. She cast a sidelong glance at Artoria, a faint smile flickering on her lips. The Greater Grail in Fuiuki has been corrupted. The mana accumulated within it is no longer colorless. That single sentence threw the chapel into commotion. Both masters and servants were visibly shocked. For those who had attended last night's prematurely ended banquet, the King of Conquerors and the King of Knights finally understood what Morgan had meant when she said, the Grail has gone mad. But shock alone didn't guarantee belief. And what grounds do you have for saying this, Witch of Britain? Tokiomi asked, his tone respectful. While he didn't care much for servants personally, he held reverence for heroic spirits. Especially one who had lived during the Age of Gods. Waver, sounding agitated, chimed in, yeah, where's the proof? If you're just going to bring up Castor again like you did last night, I'm not buying it. On the other side of the room, a crack finally appeared in Garetsugu Emiya's expressionless face. His eyes widened slightly in shock. Their reactions were exactly what Morgan had expected. In fact, had they all simply accepted her words without question, she would have found it boring. Chapter 57, The Corrupted Greater Grail. Of course there's evidence. Whether you choose to believe it is up to you, Morgan said calmly. The day after I was summoned, once the Holy Grail War began, I accompanied my master to survey the situation in Fuiuki, which led me to discover the location of the Greater Grail. Ritu Temple, atop Mount Enzo. Back then, the Tosaka, Makiori, and Insburn families had established the system of the Greater Grail under the supervision of Wizard Marshal Schwenorg, refining it with each successive Holy Grail War. Its location had long become an open secret among masters. Given that Morgan was summoned under the Berserker class, it made perfect tactical sense for Shiomi to bring her to investigate the spirit veins. And the Greater Grail itself. So, Lady Witch, you actually entered the underground chamber where the Greater Grail is stored and verified the system? Tokiomi asked, clearly concerned. Morgan nodded, then added deliberately, originally, I only intended to use the spiritual grounds of Ritu Temple as a base once the war reached its midpoint, but... You discovered the Grail had been corrupted? Artoria interjected. She couldn't accept the idea that the wish-granting vessel she had answered the summons for was no longer pure. Exactly. The mana within the Greater Grail has been tainted. Whether used as a wish-granting device or for any other function, it's no longer viable, Morgan replied with composure. She had already fully analyzed the Grail system. Given time, she could even construct a replacement. One less costly, even. They're nothing more than broken tools now, she added. Broken? Artoria's composure began to falter. She shut her eyes, forcing herself to ask, what do you mean by that? In short, the means by which it fulfills wishes have become extremely twisted and dangerous, Morgan said, turning to face her. Didn't you wish to use the Grail to prevent the downfall of Britannia? If you offered that wish to this corrupted Grail, it would attempt to rewrite established history itself. Because only by overturning recorded human history could the fall of Britannia be undone. Cold sweat beaded on Artoria's cheeks. If it did that, Britannia would be severed from the rest of the timeline. Turned into a foreign object, a distortion of human history. At that point, Morgan's voice grew slightly heavier. Only Shiomi noticed, as everyone else remained fixated on the Tropic of the Grail. In other words, it would become a singularity, she said. And this time, the counterforce would intervene to erase it. Artoria stood speechless, overwhelmed by the weight of what she had just heard. But Morgan didn't stop, as though determined to crush whatever hope remained in her, she continued, don't panic just yet. Becoming a singularity is only one possible outcome. There are worse scenarios than that. Ultimately, even Morgan couldn't be certain how far the corrupted Fuiuki Grail's power could reach. And in truth, Morgan's own summoning had been even more anomalous than Artoria's. You've been going on about the Grail being corrupted since earlier, Giritsugu Emiya finally spoke, breaking his long silence. But you're just a servant with some distant blood connection to that King of Knights over there. Why shouldn't I suspect you're just trying to demoralize the other camps by saying all this? Giritsugu was even more doubtful of Morgan's words than Artoria. He had entrusted his wish to the Grail, spent 9 years preparing and waiting. There was no way he could easily accept that it had all been in vain. All the world's evil, Morgan said, calmly. Or more precisely, Angramaniu. This time, the first to show a visible reaction was Rizai Kotamine. As the overseer of the previous Holy Grail War, he was naturally familiar with the classes and even the true names of the servants that had been summoned back then. Judging from your reaction, overseer of the Holy Church, I'd say you already know what I'm referring to, Morgan said, without even turning her head. Yet she was fully aware of the old priest's response. That is the cause of the Greater Grail's corruption. Tokyomi's face changed. He had never looked deeply into the previous Holy Grail War, focusing instead on how to win the current one as safely as possible. Gathering holy relics and other preparations. After all, no one willingly summons a servant that's already appeared before. If someone with inside knowledge realized it, that servant's true name could be exposed instantly. Father Rizai, what exactly is going on? Tokyomi asked, keeping his urgency restrained behind polite tones. As well read as he was, he knew full well that Angramaniu was a deity from Zoroastrianism. The old priest's expression was stern, his brow deeply furrowed. That was a servant summoned in the previous Holy Grail War. An irregular servant who manifested under the extra class, Avenger. At that, he narrowed his eyes and glanced toward Giritsugu Emiya, driven by his moral convictions as a priest. Avenger? Shiomi hadn't intended to speak, but the words escaped him. You mean that irregular class? That much is unclear. After all, it was the Innsburns. One of the 3 families. Who summoned Avenger, Father Rizai answered honestly. Giritsugu stood, visibly displeased. Sounds like there's no point in listening any further. Don't be so hasty, Magus of the Innsburn, Father Rizai said calmly. I'm not bringing this up to turn the other masters against you. I'm simply stating the facts. 60 years ago, the Innsburn did summon Avenger, but that servant was defeated on the 4th day. The Lesser Grail was then destroyed, and the war ended without a result. Morgan, satisfied that the priest had explained enough, picked up the thread again. Normally, when a servant is defeated in the Holy Grail War, their soul is absorbed into the Greater Grail and converted into colorless mana. But Angramaniu was different. As the embodiment of all the evils of this world, the moment his soul was absorbed, the malice and twisted desires he carried corrupted the Grail itself. As she finished, Morgan raised a hand, and a mirror formed from water floated into view within the chapel. This is the current state of the Greater Grail. If this still isn't enough to convince you, feel free to confirm it with your own eyes. Through Morgan's magecraft, everyone present could see the image of the Greater Grail. Even though it was only a projection, the abnormality was obvious. Utter nonsense. Giritsugu left those words behind and turned to leave, disappearing alone through the chapel doors. Artoria, though still full of questions, had no choice but to follow her master. While the rest of the factions stopped doubting after Morgan relinquished the right to monopolize confirmation of the truth, Giritsugu Emiya alone continued to believe that Morgan was lying. Or rather, Something fundamental within him had been shaken, and so he ran. Chapter 58, Shiomi's plan. The departure of Garrett Sugumiya and Saber did not bring Shiomi's meeting to a close. Compared to the emotionless Magus killer who stormed out, it was the implications of the Holy Grail War itself that still held everyone's attention. Through Morgan's magecraft, everyone had seen the abnormalities within the Greater Grail. If even that wasn't enough to convince them, as Morgan said, they'd simply have to go and confirm it themselves. Though everyone already knew, it wouldn't change the outcome. "I'll go to Mount Enzo myself to verify that the Greater Grail has been corrupted," Tokiomi finally said. He watched as Morgan dispelled the projection of the Grail. Though torn inside, his duty as head of the Tasaka family didn't allow him to feign ignorance or avoid the issue. Instead, he responded with calm reason. He carried himself with poise. Tokiomi, who lived by the Tasaka family code of elegance, maintained his usual composure. But anyone could see the conflict behind his furrowed brow. "However, Shiomi-kun, you didn't bring us all here today just to reveal this truth. Would you care to elaborate further?" Tokiomi posed the question, already suspecting Shiomi's intent, but needing to hear it spoken plainly before everyone present. Shiomi gave a small nod. Morgan, meanwhile, walked slowly to an empty bench and sat down, clearly signaling that her part in the discussion was finished. "My purpose is simple," Shiomi said, standing in the center aisle and meeting Tokiomi's gaze. "Now that we know the Greater Grail has been corrupted, continuing the Holy Grail War serves no benefit. And only causes harm. So, I propose we suspend the Holy Grail War and work together to purify the Greater Grail." This had become Shiomi's new mission, shaped by a shift in his objectives. "A very reasonable stance," Tokiomi said, giving a deep nod. While the pursuit of the root had long been the Tasaka family's inherited aspiration, Tokiomi couldn't, in good conscience, rely on a corrupted grail. He had no way of knowing what kind of price Fuiuki might pay if a tainted pathway to the root were opened. In that sense, Shiomi's decision was a correct one. However, based on our current assessments, purifying the Greater Grail will require extracting the corrupted mana within it, Shiomi continued. According to our projections, even if the purification succeeds, much of the mana accumulated over the past 60 years will be lost. He paused, shifting his gaze to Waver. As one of only 3 masters present, Waver may have been the least experienced, but that didn't mean he should be left out of the conversation. And Waver, of course, understood what that look meant. If the Grail's mana reserves were depleted through purification, then even if a victor emerged, the mana converted from servant souls alone would be insufficient to make the Grail function as a wish-granting device. In other words, to agree to purify the Grail was to accept that the Holy Grail War would end here. "I'm fine with it." Waver muttered his stance. He'd never had a concrete wish for the Holy Grail. Joining the war had just been his way of proving himself to the teachers and classmates who had written him off. In contrast, the real issue lay with Iskander. "Honestly, I'm disappointed too," Iskander said, scratching at his beard. "But if the Grail's been tainted, then there's nothing to be done. After all, entrusting something like the restoration of his physical form to a corrupted Grail wasn't a risk Iskander could take lightly." With that, the two of them had made their positions clear, both showing varying degrees of support for Shiomi's proposal. Given the situation, it was the most pragmatic decision for everyone involved. As for Gilgamesh, he continued to sit with his back turned to Shiomi, radiating pure boredom. No one bothered to ask for his opinion. Everyone quietly agreed to let it lie. And so, under the supervision of Rizaiko Tamine, the masters of Archer, Rider, and Berserker reached a new consensus, to purify the Greater Grail and bring an end to the Fourth Holy Grail War. Afterward, as the two groups who had contributed most to the defeat of Castor the previous night, Shiomi and Waver each received a supplementary command spell from Father Rizai. Neither of them had used any of their original command spells, so the additional marking made their seals look oddly asymmetrical. Still, valuable mana resources weren't something to complain about. The only one left bitter was Tokiomi Tasaka. He had orchestrated the whole Castor hunt, yet ended up with nothing, thanks to the King of Heroes' refusal to follow orders. Once the meeting wrapped up, Tokiomi stayed behind to consult with Father Rizai on how to proceed. Meanwhile, Shiomi and Waver left the church with their servants. "Chin up, kid." Iskander clapped Waver on the back. The war might be over, but an extra command spell could still come in handy. Waver gave him a look. "Are you an idiot? You can't use a command spell to purify the Grail. No matter how you spin it." "Not necessarily," Shiomi cut in. "There are still some who haven't accepted this resolution." His words made both members of the Rider camp tense slightly. Especially Iskander. Not only had they learned that Saber's true master wasn't the one they had assumed, but it was also clear her relationship with that master was strained beyond repair. The two could never function as a team. And considering Garrett Sugumiya's earlier demeanor, it wasn't hard to imagine he might ignore the consensus the other three factions had reached and try to continue the war on his own. Now that you mention it, Saber and her master really are the kind who obsess over their own ideals, Iskander said bluntly. I was planning to knock some sense into her last night, but that didn't quite work out. There's no need for that, King of Conquerors, Morgan suddenly spoke. If she's chosen to bear Britannia's fate, then she's already made her resolve. If someone like her could be swayed by a few words, then this whole situation wouldn't exist. Iskander gave it some thought. Maybe so. But you're her sister, right? Doesn't that make you about the same? Who knows? Morgan said with calm certainty. As a servant, maybe I've already reached my end. I've made the choice I believe in. Everything happening here is just a continuation of that choice. You really are different, Iskander laughed. At least your face doesn't have that same clouded look Saber always wears. I've outgrown that stage. Morgan responded flatly. Chapter 59, Belief. Standing on the slope outside the church gates, Shiomi watched as Ryder, having already left, patted Waver on the shoulder in encouragement. After a long pause, he finally spoke. Should we teleport back using Magecraft, or walk for a bit first? Let's walk. Hearing his somewhat indirect suggestion, Morgan gave a clear response. So, the two began walking down the stone-paved slope. I originally thought you and King Arthur were mortal enemies. But whether it was last night or just now, you seem to be protecting Saber, Shiomi said to Morgan. Is it because you're related? So only you can criticize her, and you won't allow others to say anything? Is that how you see it? Morgan asked, her expression tinged with amusement. Just a theory, Shiomi replied honestly. Morgan nodded knowingly. Nothing special. It's just that, to some extent, I understand her better than most. Artoria Pendragon is simply the result of Merlin and Uther's scheme. Someone born from the start to shoulder Britannia's fate. So, people who don't know the full story have no right to judge her, and only someone like you, who understands everything, is qualified to comment on the King of Knights. Shiomi chuckled. Reserving the right to the final interpretation. How fitting for the Queen of Winter. My status as Queen has nothing to do with Artoria Pendragon. Morgan understood Shiomi was joking, but still chose to answer seriously. Shiomi's smile gradually faded. I see. I misunderstood. That said, the King of Conquerors wasn't entirely wrong, Morgan added, pausing with a faint smile. I am a woman of deep obsessions. Sometimes, that obsession is Britannia. Other times, it's something else. After she finished speaking, Shiomi, who had already walked several steps ahead, also came to a stop. He stood at the bottom of the slope for a long moment before slowly turning around, raising his head to look back at Morgan. I know. The complex emotion in his eyes startled Morgan slightly, but she gradually understood. So that's how it is, she said, smiling in a way Shiomi couldn't quite read. Part defeat, part joy. I chose to take part in this Holy Grail war, yet I completely overlooked such a crucial detail. A magical channel existed between master and servant, allowing memories to be shared through dreams during sleep. Until now, Morgan had only slept once. The rest of the time, thanks to Shiomi's abundant mana supply, she remained unaffected even without rest. But on the other hand, Shiomi still needed sleep. So through his dreams, he inevitably saw fragments of Morgan's past. Sorry. I didn't mean to peek. It just happened naturally while I was asleep, Shiomi said awkwardly, looking away toward the empty side of the slope. I assumed you knew this would happen. Since you didn't block the subconscious interference, I figured you simply didn't care. But Morgan truly didn't mind. If anything, she was more curious about which part of her unnaturally long memories Shiomi had seen. And what he had learned. No need to worry. I'm more interested in what you saw. The two resumed walking. Shiomi slowed his pace to fall in step beside Morgan once more. It's hard to put into words. At most, I caught a few scattered fragments, Shiomi said, shaking his head. The first time wasn't so bad. I dreamed of a place where it was always raining. But the second time? The second time? Morgan raised an eyebrow slightly. His expression turned grave. There was nothing to laugh about. It was a dream of endless falling. From sharing the same boat, to facing a common enemy, and then turning on each other. There's no worse story than that. Turning on each other. Morgan softly repeated the phrase. Her usually calm face lit up with an unusual excitement. So that's the feeling you got. Shiomi crossed his arms, clearly exasperated. He couldn't understand why Morgan seemed so pleased. Alright, I get that being forced to fight an old comrade is unpleasant. But do you really have to deny it like that? Or is it that seeing people who once shared your ideals part ways is so hard for you to accept that you instinctively reject reality? Seeing the look on his face, Morgan realized Shiomi was genuinely concerned about her. And possibly even wondering if this was why she had manifested as a berserker. Well, maybe that's true. Morgan avoided elaborating further and instead shifted to a seemingly cautionary tone. One of the things I hate most is being betrayed by someone I trust. You should be careful too, Tenkai. Sensing she didn't want to go deeper into the subject, Shiomi let it drop. Don't worry. If it were any other heroic spirit, maybe I'd feel differently. But just seeing you makes it clear. Betraying your trust would be a terrible thing. He smiled and turned his head slightly. Whether it's from a personal standpoint, or in terms of consequences, it's the same. My husband really does have a silver tongue? I suppose if you were dispatched as an envoy, you could win over nations with words alone, Morgan teased. Shiomi just clicked his tongue and waved his hand, signaling that the conversation was over. The Fuiuki Church stood on a mountain in the southeastern part of the city, offering a sweeping view of most of Fuiuki below. A cold wind swept through, sending Morgan's silver hair billowing in the air. My husband, since you've resolved to purify the Holy Grail, and to avoid any unforeseen disruptions to that plan. Morgan looked off in the direction of Innsburn Castle, her expression calm. Before that, we need to remove any potential sources of instability. You mean the King of Heroes? Shiomi asked reflexively. He had always been wary of Gilgamesh. And with Kyrai still lurking in the shadows, the situation remained uncertain. To be honest, purifying the Greater Grail was just as troublesome as the Holy Grail war itself. Leave the King of Heroes for now. There's something else you must secure first, Morgan shook her head. Artoria and her master. They must be eliminated as a potential threat to your plan. If it comes to a direct battle, I'm ready anytime, Shiomi said without hesitation. No need to rush. I have another method, Morgan replied confidently, meeting Shiomi's eyes. To win without fighting. That's something you taught me. When did I ever teach you that? Shiomi was full of questions, but decided to brush it off as one of Morgan's peculiar flirtations and put it out of his mind. Since Morgan clearly had her own plans, Shiomi had no intention of interfering. Chapter 60, Why no? I didn't expect to catch you drinking alone, Kyrai. Later that night, in his own room, Kotamin Kyrai took a bottle of red wine from the cabinet and sat alone in a single armchair, sipping from his glass in silence. He heard the voice before seeing anyone. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. Someone who had just shifted from spiritual to physical form, now lounging lazily on the nearby sofa. Gilgamesh. Kyrai didn't respond to the golden servant's teasing. He simply stared at the wine in his glass without a word. Humphrey, you look troubled, Kyrai. Gilgamesh picked up the wine bottle, filled an empty glass, and gently swirled it. No matter. Speak your mind. I'm bored anyway, so I'll entertain myself by listening to your woes. Bored? Kyrai found that strange. Tenkai Shiomi gathered all the masters in the Holy Grail War and announced something that major. You don't plan to act at all? Gilgamesh took a sip of wine. Purifying the Greater Grail? The more I hear it, the more unbearably dull it sounds. A cup tainted by malice is perfect for drinking wine. Its only flaw is that it might have a hint of blood in the taste. If you're so dissatisfied, then why not oppose it? Kyrai asked. Because while the plan is boring, the man behind it is quite amusing, the King of Heroes replied with a cold smile. With just a few words, he consolidated the interests of all those mongrels, achieved the consensus he needed, and set everyone on a path toward his own goal. And he doesn't even realize it. Kyrai had some personal familiarity with Tenkai Shiomi from past collaboration. Enough to trust him to take care of Karin. But, in truth, he didn't know much about Shiomi as a person. What he could say was that the man was grounded, practical, never prone to idealism or lofty dreams. Just that alone made Kyrai feel Shiomi deserved a high evaluation. Whether as a magus or simply as a person, he was far more normal than Kotamin Kyrai himself. What do you mean by realize it exactly? Kyrai asked. Forget it. It's unrelated to the matter at hand, Gilgamesh replied, clearly withholding deeper knowledge he wasn't inclined to share. Back to the real question, Kyrai. What moved you to start drinking? Was it that person you're so obsessed with? Kyrai fell into silence. Earlier, to entertain Gilgamesh and cooperate with Tokiomi's plan, he had complied with their request to have assassin Hassan of the 100 Faces gather intelligence on the other masters. But after all that effort, Kyrai hadn't gained anything meaningful. Aside from Gilgamesh casually asking a few extra questions about Tenkai Shiomi out of curiosity. I don't know, Kyrai muttered, taking another sip. He had originally attended the meeting only on orders from his father and master, listening in from the shadows. Garrett Suguamiya showing up openly instead of operating in secret must have been a response to pressure from Shiomi. That much, Kyrai could deduce. With every other master present, The threat of an alliance to eliminate Saber's faction would have been difficult to ignore. But what shocked Kyrie more than the revelation that the Greater Grail was tainted was Garrett Sugu's reaction to it. The corruption of the Grail meant it could no longer grant wishes or lead anyone to the root. Faced with that reality, everyone present had no choice but to accept it. Yet Garrett Sugu's reaction had been disproportionately intense. Even though he dismissed Shiomi and Berserker's claims as an insult to the Insburn family and rejected their motives, Kyrie could tell. Emiya was deeply shaken. That man must be holding on to something that could only be entrusted to the Holy Grail. Which was why, no matter what, he couldn't accept the truth. Just realizing that much, even without truly understanding who Garrett Sugu Emiya was, stirred in Kyrie a strange and inexplicable excitement. Because of that, even the wine he once considered dull, kept only as part of a collection, suddenly tasted rich and full. And so, Kyrie found himself needing to drink. Just to calm the storm inside. Just thinking about Garrett Sugu Emiya's loss of composure at the meeting changes the taste of the wine entirely, Kyrie muttered, brow furrowed. He knew his own feelings were immoral, yet he couldn't suppress them. Or maybe, it was just a way to mask his disappointment in everything. To chase a dream beyond one's reach, only to realize even the means to achieve it were nothing but an illusion. Gilgamesh let out a mocking laugh as he offered his take. The sound of shattered dreams. Now that's music even I find pleasant. Kyrie, your reaction is only natural. From that perspective, Saber and her master really are the same kind of fools. But what's the point of all this? Kyrie remained deeply troubled. He wanted to reject this twisted joy he felt from witnessing others suffering. It contradicted the moral code he had built up all his life. Meaning? Gilgamesh finished his wine in a single motion. He seemed about to explain, but suddenly changed his mind. If you want to find meaning, go and see for yourself. And if even that doesn't help, maybe try asking the Tainted Grail. Kyrie's eyes widened as he looked at the King of Heroes in confusion. If you don't want to spend the rest of your life stuck in this torment, Gilgamesh said with relish, then get moving. Otherwise, the man you're so fixated on, and the corrupted Greater Grail, will both be out of reach. At that moment, the priest understood what the Golden King was hinting at. You mean, it's very likely Shiomi will make a move on Saber's camp tonight? Kyrie didn't doubt Shiomi's efficiency for a second. He had a decent grasp of the situation. Shiomi had only joined the Holy Grail War out of necessity, so it was no surprise he'd want to settle things quickly before they got more complicated. Perhaps, Gilgamesh said with a vague shrug. At least to me, neither Saber nor her master stands a chance against that man. Especially with that kind of fairy at his side. Kyrie set down his wine glass. He didn't know what exactly he was going there to do. Or what he even could do. But if he could witness Tenkai Shiomi kill Garrett Sugu Emiya, if he could see the look of desperate resistance on Emiya's face in his final moments, then maybe it was worth slipping into the night and heading straight for the Insburn forest. Chapter 61, Wish Insburn Castle. The roles of Iris V. Elon Garrett Sugu Emiya had completely reversed from just a day ago. As the Lesser Grail, Iris V. El had already absorbed the souls of Lancer and Caster, and her body was beginning to deteriorate. She could still move on her own, but her strength was fading fast. Even with all her effort, she couldn't hold on to something as small as a key. We've picked a new base. Saber will take you there tomorrow, Garrett Sugu said, sitting beside her bed as she rested. Mia will be waiting for you there. More importantly, how did the meeting go? Iris V. El opened her eyes and asked as soon as she saw her husband return to the castle. Garrett Sugu's expression darkened. Don't worry about it. It was nothing but nonsense. Just lies meant to lower our guard, get us to abandon the Holy Grail, and hand over victory. Lies? Iris V. El looked puzzled. She had only spoken with Tenkai Shiomi a few times, and her impression of him was warm and trustworthy. Someone they could rely on as an ally. So to hear Garrett Sugu call him a liar didn't sit right with her. Even if it came from Garrett Sugu himself, she couldn't accept it without question. For her husband to be so blunt, Shiomi must have proposed something he found completely unacceptable. Maybe something like surrendering the Lesser Grail? It's fine. I've already decided our next move, Garrett Sugu said gently, trying to comfort her. But he didn't say another word about what had happened at the church in Fuiuki. Realizing he didn't want to continue the conversation, Iris V. El didn't press further. After a few more brief words, Garrett Sugu left to continue his preparations in another room. Taking his place at Iris V. El's side was Saber. Don't talk too much, Iris V. El, Artoria advised. She knew Iris V. El wasn't an ordinary human, but a homunculus. An artificial being created through alchemy. In her current state, Iris V. El had sealed off part of her senses to suppress her nature as the Lesser Grail, allowing herself to move and function to some degree. But it was only a temporary fix. If they continued to absorb more servants' souls, it would only be a matter of time before she lost all mobility and fully transformed into the Lesser Grail. This process was inevitable, but... Hey, well, Garrett Sugu isn't here. Could you secretly tell me what really happened at the church today? Iris Veel's question pulled Saber out of her thoughts. Just like I said yesterday, after we finished the mission to eliminate Castor, Denkai Shiomi gathered all the masters who were still active. Together with my sister, he explained the current state of the Holy Grail, Artoria said after a long pause. As a servant, she shouldn't have revealed something Garrett Sugu had chosen to keep quiet. But Saber had already sworn, in the name of a knight, to protect Iris Veel. Her own wish was now clearly out of reach in this Holy Grail war, so she wanted to share the truth while there was still time. So Iris Veel could decide for herself. The current state. So your sister, Morgan, already understands the full nature of the Holy Grail? Iris Veel didn't seem too surprised. Yes, Saber nodded. Then, what exactly happened to the Grail? Iris Veel asked. According to my sister. And confirmed by the overseer from the Holy Church. The Greater Grail was already contaminated during the Third Holy Grail War, Saber said, her expression heavy. And the source of that contamination points back to your family. During the last war, the Innsburn summoned an irregular class servant, Avenger. Angramaniu, the embodiment of all the world's evil. Iris Veel gave a tired smile. If that's what they say, then it's probably true. You knew about this? Saber was a little taken aback. I just looked into the Innsburn family's past participation in the Holy Grail War while preparing for this one, Iris Veel said. Maybe because summoning that irregular class didn't lead to victory, my great-grandfather made sure everything was ready so Garrett Sugu could summon you, Saber. She gave Saber an apologetic smile. Honestly, all I knew was Avenger's true name. And since the last Holy Grail War ended with the Lesser Grail's destruction, it never reached a conclusion. I doubt the Tasaka family knows the full truth either. It was precisely because the Lesser Grail was so easily destroyed before a victor could be determined that the Innsburn family gave it a human form, endowing it with intelligence and mobility so it could be better protected. So I'm sorry, Saber. The Innsburn summoned you, but they're also the reason your wish can't be fulfilled, Iris Veel said sadly. Garrett Sugu keeps insisting Mr. Shiomi is lying, probably because he just can't accept it. She knew her husband well. If the Greater Grail had truly been tainted by malevolent wishes, Garrett Sugu's own dream would be realized in the most tragic way possible. That would defeat the purpose entirely. If she could, Iris Veel wanted to talk to him again, to persuade him to let go. But could she really do that? Precisely because she knew Garrett Sugu better than anyone, precisely because she understood that unwavering wish of his, Iris Veel didn't have the confidence to change his mind. In any case, we still need to. Artoria began to offer her thoughts, but before she could finish, Iris Veel's face suddenly turned pale. Someone has entered the forest, she said. Saber immediately stood up. After today's gathering, all sides were expected to tacitly agree to a ceasefire, to prepare for the purification of the Greater Grail and bring the war to a close. But Garrett Sugu's early departure may have been seen as rejecting the proposal, turning him into a destabilizing factor. Are they planning to eliminate us now? Saber wondered. No, the intruder in the forest has stopped moving, Iris Veel said, trying to focus. But it was already too late. For her, for Saber, even for Garrett Sugu and Mia, who were in the next room planning their next steps. A strange magical energy surged through Innsburn Castle. Everything before Saber's eyes vanished, replaced by a vast, endless darkness and silence. This is Chapter 62, The Garden of Lost Will, 1. When she came to, Artoria couldn't open her eyes. The sunlight was too bright. Instinctively, she raised a hand to shield them. As her vision slowly returned, she realized she was standing outside the stables. She couldn't recall whom she had just been looking at. All she remembered was making a knight's vow. To protect that person until the very end. Was it just a dream? Looking down at the coarse clothes she wore, the memories began to return. Today's task was to tend to her foster father Hector's warhorse. Maybe after finishing the job, she had grown tired and ended up sitting outside the stable, dazed under the blazing sun. Before her stretched a wide grassland bathed in the morning light. Hector's home was located beyond the town, far from the bustle of everyday life. Daydreaming out here, Artoria? Her foster father Hector approached, carrying a knight's lance. Maybe he'd come to check on her. No, I was just... Artoria started to explain, but she really had been spacing out. It's fine. A short break won't hurt, Hector said, not making a fuss. I've got something for you to do. Kay seems to have forgotten something. If you go now, you'll still catch up. Take this to him in town. The words struck her. So familiar. There was a special celebration in town today. Kay had ridden his father's warhorse into town to take part in the festival, but he'd forgotten the most important thing a knight could carry. His lance. And there weren't any warhorses in the stables waiting for her to care for. Artoria could never forget what day this was. Silently, she took the lance from Ector's hand and set off toward town. It was almost too much to believe. This scene was pulling her back to the day she drew the sword of selection, Caliburn, from the stone. She ran, crossing fields and farmland, toward the town. The atmosphere was indeed more festive than usual, but something felt slightly different from how she remembered it. Everyone was headed toward the night training ground on the outskirts. Children ran ahead, shouting and laughing. The adults moved quickly, their eyes full of anticipation. But they tempered their excitement with restraint, as if afraid to let their hopes get too high. Only their hurried steps betrayed the truth. It's the king. The king's come to town. Today, the king is choosing his personal knights. The words were slightly off from what Artoria remembered, making her stop in her tracks. The king? Could it be Father Uther? She wondered. Hey, isn't that Artorius? You really gonna just stand there and space out? Even if you're just a squire, you're still a knight. Queen Morgan might pick you, you know. A few youths who recognized her, using a male name she went by, called out as they chatted about the event. Queen Morgan? Artoria stood still in place, while the other young people, friends she'd grown up with, bustled around excitedly, speculating on who would be chosen as one of the Queen's knights. Not wanting to miss the occasion, they left her behind when she didn't respond, disappearing into the crowd. Eventually, as the road beyond the town grew quiet and everyone gathered elsewhere, she spotted Kay approaching, leading his horse. Kay, here. She held out the lance. Oh, thanks. Kay took it from her casually. This night selection by the Queen. What is it? Artoria asked, her thoughts spinning. Exactly what it sounds like. We've got no time to be chasing Merlin and Uther's fantasies. Forget some sort of selection. What really matters is people, resources, strength. And your sister? She knows how to bring everyone together, balance their interests, and lead responsibly, Kay said. That's all that matters. If you want to go, go. If not, wander the town. Just be back before nightfall. Kay mounted his horse. You don't have to carry everything on your shoulders anymore, Artoria. He said it with a weight in his voice, like he was trying to tell her something more, and then rode off. Artoria had always known. Kay never wanted her to bear the burden of Britannia or the role of a king. But there was nothing he could do as he watched her step into that fate. And now someone was telling her she didn't have to be king. That someone else had taken up that role. She didn't have to keep pushing forward alone. She lowered her head and stood before the place where the sword of selection should have stood. The stone was there. Only the shape where the sword had once rested remained. Staring at the sword-shaped indentation, she clutched her chest. It felt like something was missing from inside her. Isn't this the outcome you wished for? A familiar voice echoed out. She looked up and saw the Mega sitting nearby. The shadow of a white hood concealed most of his face, but the faint, familiar smile was unmistakable. The result I wished for. Artoria murmured as the memory returned. Britannia had been destroyed. She had been full of regret, desperate to change that end. She wanted to go back to the moment before she pulled the sword of selection, to choose someone more suited to the crown. To rewrite the story. That's why she was seeing all of this. A different king had been chosen. One the people truly supported. Queen Morgan. Artoria Pendragon's own sister. She had the bearing of a monarch, perhaps even more love for Britannia than Artoria. But Artoria had never truly known her. You don't have to pull that sword again. You don't have to be hated by mankind. You don't have to face that tragic end. Whether as the knight Artoria or the girl Artoria, you can live a normal life. A perfect ending. One where she would never be hurt again. But now, faced with that outcome, she hesitated. Even knowing this might just be one of Morgan's illusions, it struck directly at her heart. Under Queen Morgan's reign, perhaps Britannia would meet a completely different fate, the Mega said softly, with no hint of emotion. Then another voice came from behind. Or is it that you can't accept this world? She turned sharply. Morgan stood behind her. Bathed in sunlight, her expression was unreadable. She asked calmly, watching Artoria in silence. If you wish, it's not impossible to take it all back from Queen Morgan. You still have that right. The Mega spoke again. And then the world fell silent. Artoria stood alone. Before her, the sword of selection had returned. Chapter 63, The Garden of Lost Will, 2, the dry wood crackled as it was tossed into the fire, the flames flaring up slightly and casting a glow on Shiomi and Morgan's faces. They were in the Innsburn forest, only about 4 kilometers from the castle. Both sat on fallen tree trunks, facing the campfire. "Is this far enough?" he asked Morgan. "It is. Back when we allied with the Innsburns and visited the castle, I'd already started preparing. Planning for when the alliance ended and the Holy Grail War resumed." Morgan watched the flames flicker. "For Artoria, the Garden of Lost Will suits her perfectly." "The Garden of Lost Will?" Shiomi nodded. Strictly speaking, the Garden of Lost Will wasn't magecraft in the traditional sense, but a mystic code. It required no incantations. Just mana. And it would activate in accordance with the user's will. However, if the user lacked the strength to control it, they might be swallowed up along with it. "But something like that wouldn't just affect Artoria," Morgan said. "If anyone else is in the castle, they'll get dragged in too. So it's best to stay away for now, my husband. Unless you want to experience it for yourself." Shiomi scrunched up his face like he just tasted fresh lemon juice. "I'll pass." He didn't know exactly what would happen, but Morgan had already explained the mechanism of the Garden of Lost Will when they lit the fire earlier. It strips away a visitor's heart until nothing remains, plunging them into self-inflicted pain and guilt. A cold garden that unveils the warmth and lies it conceals. Endure it to the end, and you can leave. But not before your heart vanishes. Shiomi's refusal wasn't out of fear of what he might see. He had other reasons. "Do you think my magecraft is too cruel?" Morgan asked calmly. The moment magecraft became a tool for conflict, words like cruel lost their meaning. The Holy Grail War is a life-or-death struggle. "If anything," Shiomi said, warming his hands by the fire, "you're too soft. We could have just raised the entire Saber camp and the castle together, wiped them out of this war completely. But you chose this roundabout method. That's not what subduing the enemy without fighting is supposed to mean." "But you didn't object, did you?" Morgan said with a faint smile. "Just making an observation," Shiomi replied, lowering his gaze as he held his hands out to the fire again. The firelight reflected in his eyes, creating a striking, almost unsettling look. Cruelty or ruthlessness. He'd never describe her with those words. She had meant it as a joke, but instead, it had sounded like self-deprecation, like some kind of masochistic confession. And that had upset him. "Just sitting by the fire waiting for the outcome feels a bit dull," Morgan said. "The Garden of Lost Will is your magecraft. You should be able to see what's happening inside, right?" Shiomi raised an eyebrow. "I'm not interested. Whether it's Artoria or anyone else, what they see in the garden, whether they can walk out or not, has nothing to do with me." Morgan pressed her knees together and laid her hands flat on them, her posture completely relaxed. "This forest is so untouched. And now the dew is thick and the night's deep." She gently patted the spot beside her. "Come sit here. It's warmer than the fire." "No need. I'm not some ordinary person. If a magus can't even handle the cold, then what's the point?" He trailed off mid-sentence. Morgan had already put on that look that left no room for refusal. "We're still in the middle of combat." "I'm not listening," Shiomi muttered, turning his head to avoid looking at her. If he did, just one glance would be enough. Even without magecraft or mana, he would end up yielding to her will. "Since you won't came to me, then I'll come to you." He had forgotten that they were only sitting across the bonfire from each other. There was no divide between them. Just a few steps and they'd be side by side. Morgan didn't do anything besides sitting next to him, yet he still felt an odd twinge of disappointment, like he had expected something more. Pathetic. "By the way, once the Garden of Lost Will is deployed, anyone approaching it besides the intended target will be dragged in too," Morgan said. "Why bring that up now?" Shiomi asked, puzzled. "I was worried my husband might get restless and charge off to deal with Artoria's group. If that happens, I'll have no choice but to cancel the magecraft to protect you. Do I really seem that violent?" Just as he finished speaking, Shiomi suddenly looked up. He sensed other presences in the forest. "There's more than one." "Quite a few," Morgan said, closing her eyes and linking her mind to the barrier around the forest. After analyzing the ward, she didn't dismantle it. Instead, she infused her own spell into it, hijacking the surveillance system and taking control of the entire Innsburn forest. Anyone trying to enter or leave would still be detected, even if they didn't trigger the forest's defensive magecraft. "A lot?" Shiomi's brow lifted slightly. "One of them is human, heading straight toward the castle. They'll be there in 2 minutes, tops," Morgan reported calmly. "As for the rest, they're all servants. But their presence is incredibly faint. A swarm of weak servant signals." "That's assassin," Shiomi said, folding his arms. "So assassin has some kind of duplication ability. It weakens their individual strength, but it's ideal for assassination and reconnaissance." Morgan opened her eyes. "The number of servants keeps increasing. Looks like they're throwing everything at us to keep us pinned here. But isn't the castle too clever for their own good?" Morgan couldn't help but think the timing was just a little too perfect. The deafening rumble of an engine snapped him back to awareness. Garrett Suguamiya realized he was sitting in a beat-up pickup truck. Beside him, a girl sat calmly at the wheel, her hands relaxed as the steering wheel vibrated under her grip. The vehicle had left the village and was now heading deeper into the jungle. "Where are we?" "Awake now, Carrie?" the girl asked. That long-forgotten name made Garrett Sugu turn to her in shock, his eyes wide. It was the horizon of a memory, bleached and distant. The other side blurred by blood and gunpowder. For a soul like Garrett Sugu's, steeped in the scent of war, it was a memory of his origin, now hopelessly out of reach. He cautiously looked into the small truck's rearview mirror. Through the weathered glass, Garrett Sugu saw a face he could barely remember. Yet unmistakably, it was his own from his younger days. Chapter 64, The Garden of Lost Will, 3. In a stone-walled room, on a white hospital bed, a woman ravaged by terminal illness looked at him with a smile full of love. That frail body, reduced to skin and bones, unable even to stand. Kyrie could never forget it. And he had no reason to. Claudia Hortensia. His wife, who had passed away 4 years ago. Kyrie Kotamin quickly grasped what was happening. He had originally come to Innsburn Castle, hoping to reach Garrett Suguamiya before Tenkai Shiomi did, to confront that man once more and seek the answers he still lacked. But once he entered the castle, the world around him shifted. And now he stood in this scene. A sunlit room. Kyrie stood by a hospital bed, gazing down at his wife. It was that day. He didn't know how it worked, but he could guess. Some kind of barrier had conjured this illusion, letting him see his long-dead wife. And yet, it was too real. Even if he wanted to break through it, he couldn't find the way. More than that, he remembered exactly what day this was. A man born flawed. Kyrie understood that truth deeply. Though incapable of understanding morality, he still possessed common sense. He spent his entire youth trying to overcome that emptiness. His ascetic pursuits did nothing to ease his suffering, every effort ended in futility. His final attempt was with the woman before him. It was the simplest thing in the world. Everyone dreams of loving someone, starting a family, and at life's end, exhaling their final breath in peace. Kyrie wanted that. Even if he couldn't truly feel the appeal of such a calm, happy life, he still wished it could be real. To love someone. To have a child. But why, then, had he chosen a woman with no future? Her body already ravaged by disease, it was obvious to anyone she didn't have long to live. Kyrie couldn't recall what made him choose her. For 2 years, he loved his wife. And she loved him like one would love a child. But nothing changed. No progress, no healing. The only time Kyrie felt something like happiness was when he saw her suffering, writhing under the weight of her illness. The more he loved her, the more misfortune he brought her. Claudia was like a saint. She loved Kyrie unconditionally and deeply understood the anguish and torment in his heart. And that was exactly why it tormented him even more. Someone who could understand him so completely. Someone like that would soon vanish. After her, who else could ever understand him? He recognized his inherent defect, knew there was no cure and no solution. There was only one conclusion left. Kyrie made up his mind. To end his life. And as a husband, once he had resolved to die, he owed it to his wife to tell her. Claudia Hortensia loved Kyrie Kotamin. Kyrie believed he should feel the same. Which is why he knew exactly what he needed to say to her. Just like every time they met, even in the depths of her illness, Claudia waited for him that day with quiet anticipation. And when she saw Kyrie walk into the room, his face full of anguish, she greeted him with a smile as gentle and compassionate as the Virgin Mary's. "I couldn't fall in love with you." That's what Kyrie said to his wife that day. "No, you do love me." As if she had known this moment would come, Claudia calmly drew a dagger she had prepared in advance and brought it to her throat. Kyrie remembered clearly. He had cradled her in a pool of blood, and in her final moments, she had spoken her last words. "Because you're crying." It was on that day that Kyrie's wife departed this world, in a way that defied doctrine, defied faith. So he had never imagined, not even in his dreams, that he would relive that day again. Claudia looked at him with that same warm smile, waiting for his next words. Kyrie's throat moved. In a composed, even voice, he spoke the same line he had before. He could have chosen to say something else. But he didn't. He chose to repeat it. As if following a script, Claudia's expression didn't waver. She reached under the white sheets, pulled out the dagger, and raised it toward her throat. "No, you do love me." But this time, before the blade could touch her skin, it was taken from her. For an executor trained to perfection, stopping a dying woman was effortless. He caught her and snatched the dagger away with his other hand. Claudia looked at him in surprise, smiling in a way Kyrie had never seen before. A smile filled with peace, with the joy of being saved. Whether it was she who had been redeemed, or Kyrai himself, he didn't know. And it didn't matter. See? You really do love. She was about to declare her victory, tenderly refuting Kyrai's denial, when her voice suddenly cut off. The dagger plunged into her heart. Even then, this woman, who had loved him like a saint, who had always understood him, didn't lose the look in her eyes. She simply grasped Kyrai's arm, the one holding the dagger. Her lips moved. A faint, rasping sound came from her throat, as if she still wanted to say something. But the words wouldn't come. Kyrai didn't wait. He didn't ask. He twisted the blade in her heart without hesitation. He heard something inside her shatter. Like a piece of fine amber falling and splintering into irreparable fragments. Blood spilled from the corner of her mouth. With the last of her strength, her hand fell limply onto the bed. Kyrai watched the light fade from her eyes until it was gone completely. She was dead. Claudia Hortensia had been killed by his own hand. Maybe it was because he had broken the script. Ignored the illusion's intended outcome. But the sunlit stone room darkened and was swallowed by boundless blackness. The dagger, the woman, everything else lost all meaning. Only one thing remained, the moment he killed her. That moment filled the hollow inside Kyrai Kotamin for the first time. In more than 20 years of an empty life, he finally felt whole. He didn't know what the creator of this illusion had wanted him to see. But Kyrai was grateful. Without this, he might never have had the chance to choose again. Or to face what he truly felt. Yes, he had cried 4 years ago, when his wife took her own life in front of him. They were tears of sorrow. But not because he loved her, as she believed. Now, Kyrai could finally remember it clearly. He hadn't cried because she died. Back then, this is what he had thought, this can't be. If she was going to die anyway. I wanted to kill her myself. What made him sad was simply that he couldn't savor her death. That was all. Now that he had a chance to relive it, he chose differently. Still, he couldn't help but think. Maybe, even in death, that woman had fully understood who Kyrai Kotamin really was. That thought left him with a twinge of regret. But only just that. Nothing more. Chapter 65, Anomaly Swoosh. The blade cleaved through the neck. The black-clad body toppled backward. The seventh one. In just a few minutes, Denkai Shiomi had already slain 7 assassins. Or rather, 7 different bodies. Men, women, the elderly, teenagers. Muscular, frail, overweight. Some moved with the grace of swallows, others struck with brute force. No matter how you categorize them, it was impossible to fully define them. But they were all undeniably assassins. And all far weaker than expected. Individually, each one was far beyond an ordinary human. But as servants, their stats were so low they couldn't even be compared to other classes. They fell within a few exchanges. If they were all the same, Shiomi might have finished them even faster. But each time, they were slightly different. Every assassin had a similar, yet subtly distinct, fighting style. That meant he had to read their moves from scratch and find an opening each time before landing the kill. Even after losing 7, the assassins showed no fear. One after another, they sprang from the treetops with weapons drawn, launching a suicidal assault on Shiomi. And yet, throughout all their attacks, Shiomi hadn't taken a single step back. While fending them off, he analyzed them calmly in his mind. To prepare for the Holy Grail War, Shiomi had researched the assassin class known for the highest risk of identity exposure. The various incarnations of Husanai Saba. Unlike public records, the Mages Association possessed far more detailed information. Among the many Husans, one stood out in his memory. A figure infamous for multiple independent personalities, each mastering knowledge and skills beyond normal human reach. Some excelled in strategy, others in foreign tongues. Some used poison, some were masters of traps. A few could even exhibit strength or speed their bodies shouldn't have been capable of. They could alter their appearances flawlessly. Man, woman, old, young. So seamlessly that even their personality shifted to fit the role. Hassan of the 100 Faces. It was the only answer that fit. "How's my weapon?" Morgan asked casually, still facing away from him as she sat on a tree trunk, idly prodding the fire with a stick she'd picked up. She didn't even glance his way. With such a one-sided fight, it was only a matter of time before it ended. The assassins had ruined her peaceful moment with Shiomi. A sin beyond forgiveness. Since Shiomi had chosen to deal with them himself, Morgan was more than happy to let him. "Works like a charm." Shiomi raised his voice in reply, throwing in an archaic turn of phrase to make Morgan smile. He hadn't expected Morgan's weapon to shift form so freely, transforming into a two-handed longsword. While he hadn't formally studied swordsmanship, under Skathak's doctrine of mastering all martial disciplines, he'd gained considerable proficiency. The forest was too cramped to fight freely, and he hated the thought of damaging such a pristine natural space. Morgan's weapon transforming into a sword spared him a lot of hassle. Though his sword skills weren't as polished as his spear work, they were more than enough to deal with these weakened assassin clones. Silently, he set a rule for himself. If even a single one of them got past him and laid a hand on Morgan, it would be proof of his own failure. The 8th. With a swing, the sword fell. The assassin's body tumbled backward and lay still. Shiomi flicked the blood from his blade and scanned the remaining movement. Then a surprised voice rang out behind him. Turning, he saw Morgan holding a hand to her forehead, as if sensing something. Alarmed, Shiomi immediately leapt back, landing at her side and crouching. What is it? More intruders. It's not that serious, Morgan said with a shake of her head. I just didn't expect the Garden of Lost Will to be breached. Shiomi looked stunned. Breached? I thought you said that even if someone made it through, it wouldn't affect you. Normally, yes. Anyone who enters the garden is forced to confront their innermost self. Even if they manage to endure it, their hearts should be worn down to nearly nothing. Morgan frowned thoughtfully. But this is the first time I've seen anything like it. It's as if the person has no heart at all. No heart? Shiomi narrowed his eyes. The assassins were still lurking in the forest, continuing their suicidal attempts to stall them. Which meant the one who had entered the castle and survived the garden could only be Kairiko Tamine. Yeah. Seems my magecraft isn't flawless after all. Morgan looked unbothered. Didn't think I'd run into someone it couldn't affect. That might not be the magecraft's fault, Shiomi replied with a wry smile, gently taking her arm. When it came to Kairiko Tamine, Shiomi didn't have strong personal feelings. He just thought of him as someone you could still have a normal conversation with. Still, he'd always had a vague sense that, while Kairi might not be evil, something inside him was broken. There was something absent in that executor. Some human quality that simply wasn't there. Shiomi had met many priests of the Holy Church before, but none like Kairi. Even the coldest magus didn't fall into the same category. Sounds like my husband knows what's going on, Morgan said softly. Her breath carried a faint sweetness that made Shiomi realize he'd leaned in a little too close in his concern. It was brushing his face. No, I wouldn't say I know, he said as he helped her to her feet, brows furrowed. It's just that when it comes to someone like Kairiko Tamine, you can only approach it from a very specific angle. No matter how much of a failure he might seem, he's still Karen's biological father. I don't want to speak too harshly about him. Morgan shook her head. But that doesn't change reality. Shiomi released her arm and stamped out the fire. The assassins around them seemed to receive a signal. They began retreating, one after another. Come to think of it, they kept rushing at us even knowing they'd die. Shiomi narrowed his eyes. Must have been command spells. Morgan rested a hand on her hip and looked toward the castle. So their role was to delay us with these relentless attacks. Looks like we underestimated them. This isn't good. We should move out, Shiomi said. Didn't you say we'd flatten the castle along with them? It's not too late, Morgan teased, flashing him a playful smile. He blinked. If you've changed your mind, then fine. We can stay. I'll start prepping a grand magecraft. You're hopeless, Morgan said with a laugh. Shiomi gave a resigned wave, ending the exchange. In an instant, a storm of crows filled the air, circling around them. We can go straight to the castle, Morgan reminded him. I've already begun lifting the Garden of Lost Will. Got it. Chapter 66, The Garden of Lost Will, 4, This country will fall. Sooner or later. Even if it endures for another 100 years, it won't change the course of this island's history. In truth, it's already finished. Britannia ends here. If I said that to you, what would you do? Just as she reached out to draw the sword of selection as she had so many times before, those words echoed in Artoria's ears. Her hand froze midair, unsure of what to do. They were the words of her teacher, the Magus of Flowers Merlin, spoken to her at the port when she set sail for her final campaign against Rome. What had she said in reply back then? Artoria closed her eyes, trying to remember. If you're just making one of your usual cruel jokes again, I'll be angry. Britannia won't fall. That's why I'm going. To do what must be done. Yes, that was her answer. Before setting sail, just as she had during the 10 years of her reign, she hadn't once doubted or hesitated. She truly believed in victory. And in herself. The undefeated King of Knights had always lived that way. Even if she lost everything. Even if everyone came to hate her. She would still choose to fight. That was the oath of Artoria Pendragon as king. She offered her own fate in exchange for the chance to protect her people. But the end unfolded just as Merlin had said. It hadn't been one of his usual cruel jests, but a truth too painful to keep to himself. One she had failed to understand at the time. When she returned from the Roman campaign, what awaited her was a rebellion, led by the knight Mordred. And with it, the final battle of the undefeated king. She had fought with everything she had. She had given her all. And still, Britannia fell. Unable to accept that her efforts amounted to nothing, unable to accept such a cruel fate, she made a contract, offering her posthumous self in exchange for the chance, as a servant, to seek the Holy Grail and find a way to save Britannia. Your sister never told you the full truth. The hooded magus, his face hidden in shadow, still sat before her. Human history has already reached its conclusion. Whether the Holy Grail is tainted or remains pure, no matter the outcome, nothing changes. Artoria pressed forward. Why? If it's the true Grail, then surely. I've already said it. Human history has its answer. To the people of Britannia, its fall was a disaster. But to the continuity of human history, it was a necessary turning point. The white figure spoke with a sigh, revealing the truth to the King of Knights. With your death, and with Britannia's destruction, the last vestiges of the Age of Gods will vanish from the world. What follows will be a new era, one that belongs solely to mankind. No gods. No beings above humanity to guide them. For better or worse, humanity must write its own history. If you insist on rejecting that outcome, no matter how pure the Grail, no matter how noble the method, if Britannia still stands, then the flow of completed history will be thrown into disarray. And when that happens, Britannia will be stripped away, cast out as a foreign distortion of human history. Morgan's words at the church still echoed in her ears. Barely half a day had passed, yet they remained vivid. So there was no need. No need for Artoria to offer her soul after death as some costly sacrifice. No need for Artoria to chase a miracle that might rewrite fate. All that was required was for her to accept the outcome. As if in response to that realization, the world around her shifted. The sunlit afternoon vanished in an instant, replaced by stormy skies thick with clouds. A torrential downpour crashed down on her, soaking her to the bone. Yet the sword of selection still stood planted in the stone, unmoving amidst the wind and rain. In the distance, the clash of battle echoed. Beyond that, the forest was ablaze. She raised her rain-drenched face and looked toward the small town turned battlefield. There were no townsfolk. No knights gathered for the selection. Only monsters and warriors clashed. Heroic spirits from across the ages, summoned by the counterforce, had arrived in Britannia to carry out their missions. Faces familiar and unfamiliar filled the field. Some fighting side by side, others as foes. So this is the Britannia that became a singularity in human history? Artoria's heart twisted with pain. She no longer knew which ending was more cruel. And didn't want to decide. Even if you created a flourishing Britannia, ended the wars, brought happiness to its people, in the end, it would still lead to the same conclusion. Even so, Britannia was destroyed. Because everything has already been etched into the quantum record. Tell me. Do you really know how to reach a gentler ending? The magus of flowers stood beside her, flickering like a destabilized anomaly. In the span of just a few sentences, his appearance shifted several times. Gawain, Lancelot, Tristan, Percival. And finally, back to Merlin once more. Why? Are you showing me this? Artoria asked, her head lowered. She wasn't sure if she was asking her teacher, or the Knights of the Round Table she took such pride in. All she knew was that this place was an illusion. Everything she saw, heard, touched, was crafted to push her toward surrender. That's why she had to ask. You already know the reason, don't you, sorrowful red dragon? Artoria Pendragon? Morgan's figure emerged beside her, her voice cool and calm. No one here had told her anything new. This was all knowledge Artoria had carried within her, now laid bare through this vision. The answer had long been carved into Artoria Pendragon's mind. It was she who had chosen to turn away from it. But it wasn't that nothing remained. It meant accepting everything. Accepting Britannia's fall, and recognizing it as the final result of her struggle. And then, just before the Night King could make her choice, the surrounding illusion collapsed once more into darkness. When the scene cleared, she found herself standing in one of the rooms within Innsbruck Castle. The only change. The bed was empty. The warmth of rain, the glow of sunlight, the rough comfort of simple clothing. Gone. She was once again clad in her dark, masculine armor, the elegant figure of a woman king. Iridatsvail? Realizing something was wrong, she whispered in shock. And then, a thunderous explosion rang out from outside. Chapter 67, Sudden Shift. A few minutes earlier, Tenkai Shiomi scratched his head as he looked around the ruined hall of Innsbruck Castle, which was just as wrecked as it had been 2 days ago. If anything, it couldn't be helped. Restoring this place in such a short time would have required a massive amount of mana. Or money. And during the Holy Grail War, who had the luxury for that? He and Morgan ascended the broken steps, tattered red carpet still clinging to the stone beneath. The Magecraft's been lifted, but we have no idea what happened to the others during that time, Morgan said. She hadn't checked the outcome. She simply had no interest in it. In other words, they might all be mentally wrecked, Shiomi murmured, carefully sensing the atmosphere within the castle. What would happen if someone came out before the Garden of Lost Will was fully dispelled? Morgan looked momentarily caught off guard. That's hard to say. She had seen people endure the garden to the end without losing themselves. But someone who emerged from that place without any sign of guilt or pain. Someone who not only resisted but acted completely irrationally afterward. What kind of vision would they even see? Maybe they'd see what the others saw. She smiled faintly, tinged with uncertainty. Without a single precedent, even Morgan couldn't say for sure. Why don't you check it yourself? Shiomi asked. Is this really the time for that? Morgan frowned. Well, Shiomi was just about to agree when a sudden shift in the atmosphere around the corner made him freeze. He immediately stopped talking and dashed forward. Kairiko Tamin. And slung over his shoulder was a silver-haired woman. Iris V. Ilvanensburn. What do you think you're doing, Kotamin? Shiomi raised his sword. You planning to continue the Holy Grail War like this? Kairi gave a twisted smile. You're the last person I want to hear that from, Shiomi. Especially after launching a surprise attack in the middle of the night. TCH. But I do owe you and your servant some thanks. I don't know what kind of magecraft that was, but thanks to it, I've gained a lot. Kairi's smile twisted into something nauseating. And now, I know exactly what I must do. Shiomi narrowed his eyes. And by must do, you mean kidnapping someone else's wife? You really didn't know? Kairi's tone grew more shameless. This woman is the lesser grail prepared by the Innsburns for this Holy Grail War. I'm just making sure I've secured the small prize first. Before I go after the big one. You've changed, Kairiko Tamin, Shiomi muttered, his voice heavy with disgust. If what Kairi said was true, then it was likely the Garden of Lost Will had been the catalyst for his transformation. The priest who once upheld morality had quietly become a man who reveled in evil. You haven't changed a bit. Still clinging to people who have nothing to do with you, Kairi said flatly. Entrusting that child to you. Seems that was the right call after all. Shiomi narrowed his eyes. I'm not in the mood to talk about Karen. Let go of Innsburn. Now. Or else. Unfortunately, I can't grant that request like I did before. Kairi glanced down the corridor Shiomi was blocking. At the far end was a window. 4 stories up. Plenty high enough. Realizing Kairi's intent, Shiomi lunged first, aiming to take down the transformed priest before he could act. In an instant, the gap between them vanished to just a step. Only for a golden flash to erupt out of nowhere. Shiomi halted and leapt back, raising his sword just in time to parry. Noble phantasms of all shapes exploded from the ether, crashing into the walls and sending debris flying in a cloud of dust. A gust of wind whipped past, clearing the smoke. It was Morgan's magecraft. But Shiomi's attention was on someone else. On the figure who stepped into view, grinning as he pulled a dark hat from his head. Gilgamesh. The attack that blocked Shiomi's strike had come from his vault. And Shiomi hadn't sensed even a hint of his presence until the golden servant appeared. For someone as ostentatious as Gilgamesh to suppress his presence. It was enough to put anyone on edge. To think you'd trouble your king for backup? You've grown bold, Kairi. Though his words were edged with annoyance, Gilgamesh didn't radiate killing intent. If anything, he looked entertained. There was no need to bother the king of heroes. But that one reacted faster than expected. Kairi smirked, casting a glance at Shiomi. Last-minute adjustments are bound to have flaws. Click. The sound of a rifle's bolt. Garrett Suguamiya emerged from a nearby room, weapon raised and trained on Kairi's back. Put Ira down, he said coldly. But his bloodshot eyes betrayed how worn he was. Clearly, the Garden of Lost Will had drained him. His assistant, Mihisa, hadn't even regained consciousness yet. Humphrey. Just a mongrel. A shimmer beside Gilgamesh gave way to swirling portals, multiple noble phantasms aiming squarely at Garrett Sugu and Shiomi. Kairi raised a hand. Wait, King of Heroes. If we fight here, the Lesser Grail might be destroyed. Gilgamesh replied lazily, then what do you propose? Just remember, as long as the core is intact, the vessel doesn't need to be original. You're right. It's not exactly convenient to carry a woman like this around. Kairi released his grip, letting Iris Veil slide from his shoulder. Then seized her by the throat without hesitation. Garrett Sugu's finger tensed on the trigger. But even he wasn't sure he could bypass Gilgamesh to land a clean shot. Unbothered, Kairi pressed his hand against Iris Veil's chest, a sick smile spreading across his face. And then, with a swift thrust, he drove his hand straight through her. The trigger snapped. Bullets flew. But each was stopped cold by the invisible barrier around Gilgamesh. Bang! The explosion outside sent a shockwave through the hall. Fully armed, Artoria burst through the door, but what she saw made her breath catch. Kairai's hand had pierced Iris-Veel's chest like it was paper. And from within, he pulled something out. A deep crimson orb. The Lesser Grail's core. Iris-Veel's heart. Without so much as a second thought, Kairai flung her toward Artoria like she was trash. Iris-Veel. Artoria cried out, forced to catch her midair. And in that moment, the formation she and Giritsugu held was broken. Gilgamesh snapped his fingers. Chapter 68, Holy Relic. A brilliant flash of light erupted, so intense that none of them could keep their eyes open. By the time it faded, Kairai, Kotamin and Gilgamesh had vanished from the dead-end corridor. They must have used a low-rank noble phantasm designed to disrupt the senses. Shiomi and Morgan lowered their guard. Giritsugu dropped his gun and sprinted toward his wife. Shiomi also rushed to Artoria's side. There was still time. With the use of Age of Gods rune magecraft, even the loss of a heart wasn't necessarily fatal. He could save Iris-Veel. But as he reached them and saw Giritsugu take Iris-Veel from Artoria's arms, he froze. Artoria did too. The wound was gone. The place where her heart should have been torn out was perfectly intact, the only trace a blood-soaked patch on her chest. It was as if the entire scene, her core being torn out, had been nothing but a shared illusion. Her wound healed? Artoria said, puzzled. She couldn't tell if this was some extraordinary regenerative ability unique to the Insburn homunculi. Has the Insburn line evolved this far? Shiomi muttered in disbelief. Giritsugu clutched his wife tightly. Iris-Veel, slowly regaining consciousness, let out a faint groan. Giritsugu. She raised her hand to gently touch her husband's tear-streaked face. I see. So that was the relic used to summon Artoria, Morgan said calmly as she walked over, revealing a quiet truth. Eh? Artoria looked up, confused. Giritsugu said nothing, still holding Iris-Veel close. Iris-Veel, now understanding what had happened, remained quiet for a moment. She hadn't blacked out. She'd simply been snatched away so quickly she couldn't react. Losing her heart should have meant instant death. But Kairai's attempt to restrain Saber had unintentionally saved her. That relic Morgan mentioned. It was what had saved her. Pushing herself up in Giritsugu's arms, she looked at Artoria with guilt. I'm sorry, Saber. I kept it from you, Iris-Veel said softly. It was supposed to be Giritsugu's to carry. But he was afraid something might happen to me, so he gave it to me instead. What? What are you talking about? Artoria was still trying to piece things together. Having just escaped the Garden of Lost Will, overwhelmed by chaos, she struggled to catch up. The ever-distant Utopia, Avalon. Morgan leaned casually against the wall as she spoke. The sheath that was supposed to have vanished long ago. And yet you managed to find it in this era. The hallway fell into silence. Shiomi sensed it wasn't the right time to keep pressing the matter, so he turned to the others. Let's pause this discussion for now. Insburn just escaped death and needs rest. Besides, tonight's chaos threw our plans into disarray. In other words, you're not going to continue attacking us? Iris-Veel asked weakly. It was only because your side rejected the plan I proposed that we decided to act, to avoid complications, Shiomi said, shrugging with his sword still in hand. But it seems someone else was playing their own game. And now the situation really has gotten messy. Yes. Iris-Veel didn't press further. They were enemies to begin with. If cooperation wasn't possible, eliminating the other side was only logical. But with the appearance of a new mutual threat, a temporary truce was now the wisest move. Especially that strange magecraft. Everyone in the castle had been pulled into an illusion. Clearly, they could no longer oppose Shiomi's side. Giritsugu said nothing. He simply carried his wife back to their room, laid her on the bed, and went to find clean clothes. He had no intention of discussing the sheath or the stolen core of the Lesser Grail. It was as if the Holy Grail war no longer concerned him. Right now, Iris-Veel was all that mattered. What do you plan to do next? In the castle's guest room, after settling the unconscious Mia, Artoria approached Shiomi and Morgan with the question. First, we need to inform Waver Velvet and Iskander. As for Tasaka, Shiomi frowned. The servant acted on his own, doing something that blatantly violates the agreement made at the church earlier, Morgan said. That Magus has probably been betrayed by his servant. Hard to say. Maybe not. Shiomi knew he needed to check on it right away. But with only a 50-50 chance of finding anything, rushing out might just waste time. Especially since Kairai had conspired with Gilgamesh to steal Iris-Veel's heart. Going by their original plan, Kairai probably meant to take the entire Lesser Grail. It was only because they'd been interrupted that he had to settle for just the core. What are they after? Artoria asked. That's what I want to know, Shiomi muttered, lips pressed in a thin line, before giving a bitter smile and shaking his head. Whatever it is, they have no intention of purifying the Grail or ending this war. In that case, Innsburn has lost her function as the Lesser Grail, Morgan added. At least she won't vanish completely when the servants disappear and their souls are reclaimed. Is that so? Artoria found herself somewhat relieved. Maybe this really was the best outcome for Irisveil. There's no point staying here, Shiomi said. I'll try to get in touch with Iskander first. Tokiomi Tasaka is likely already dead. After weighing his options, he chose to prioritize the faction with fewer conflicting interests. On one hand were Tasaka's apprentice and their servant, on the other, students from the Mages Association and their servants. He'd win over who he could, then move on from there. Well then, let's head back. What a pointless raid this turned out to be, Morgan quipped as he stood up. Shiomi raised an eyebrow. Was that a jab at me? No, just trying to cheer you up, Morgan said with a faint smile. You've got a weird way of doing that. Shiomi smirked, turned to Artoria, nodded in farewell, and added, come to my place early tomorrow. We need to go over our next move. I'll let Garrett Sugu and Irisveil know. Artoria nodded, watching the two leave. Only after they'd gone did she realize there was something she'd forgotten to ask Morgan. She'd have to bring it up another time. Chapter 69, True Nature night had fallen over Fuyuki City, and the church was quieter than usual. After completing his usual duties, Riziko Tomine began his routine inspection of the chapel and happened to see his son Kairai returning from outside. He wasn't surprised by Kairai's outing. Although the Holy Grail War had been temporarily suspended due to unusual developments, with all parties agreeing to a truce, that didn't mean Kairai had to stop assisting Tokiomi Tasaka with intelligence gathering. After all, it was only a verbal agreement. There was no binding force behind it. Besides, one master hadn't even taken part in the truce discussions and was under no obligation to align with the other factions. You're back, Kairai, Father Rizai greeted him. Though Kairai looked slightly travel-worn, as if he had just returned from afar, there were no signs of battle on him. His robes were spotless, not even wrinkled. The old priest thought nothing of it. I just came back from the Innsburn forest, Kairai nodded, then added, as expected, Denkai Shiomi and his servant launched an assault on Innsburn and Saber. Father Rizai showed no surprise, merely offering a knowing smile. So they really struck first to keep their plan to purify the Greater Grail from being anticipated? That appears to be the case, Kairai agreed. Father Rizai turned and headed toward the church's basement office. So what happened? You're back so quickly. Did Berserker already take down Saber? Father, do you really think Tenkai Shiomi is guaranteed to win? Kairai asked. Based on how the war has gone so far, even Kenneth from the clock tower is dead. That man is likely the most formidable contender in this Holy Grail war, Rizai said. But with the Greater Grail already malfunctioning, we may not need any more bloodshed. In a sense, that's a blessing. As the Holy Church's overseer, Rizai had reported the situation to his superiors. His current orders were simply to continue monitoring the developments and witness the purification of the Greater Grail and the conclusion of the Holy Grail War. It was, all things considered, an easy task. You've worked hard so far. Once everything's over, take a break and get some rest, Father Rizai said warmly, turning back to Kairai. I've already made the arrangements for you. He had wanted to suggest that Kairai visit Claudia's grave after everything was settled, but in the end, he kept it to himself. It was better to let Kairai make that decision on his own. Yes, Kairai responded without expression. Thank you for your arrangements, Father. That answer left the old priest both pleased and proud. His son was devout, composed, and disciplined. Truly worthy of being called a saint. Rizai believed he would go on to become one of the church's finest, walking a path far greater than his own. So, what was the outcome? Father Rizai didn't forget the most important part. Although he personally leaned toward a Shiomi victory, there was always the chance of an unexpected twist. Either way, he needed to verify and record the result, then discuss the next steps with Tokiomi Tasaka. There was no conclusion. The battle was interrupted by external interference, Kairai said. Rizai was slightly taken aback. Interrupted? Yes. Were you able to confirm the details? Rizai asked as he opened the door to his office, the question coming naturally. I was close enough to witness the full picture. From beginning to end, Rizai held not the slightest suspicion toward his son. To him, Kairiko Tomine was capable, composed, and devout. An ideal priest in training. So he thought nothing of it, even as Kairai stepped too close. As a former combatant, the old priest should have recognized that this was a dangerously short distance. Even someone untrained could do serious harm at such range. Let alone Kairai, forged through countless harsh missions and deadly assignments. I want to know. What do I mean to you? Kairai's voice came from behind as he stepped into the room. Caught off guard by the question, the old priest halted, pausing to reflect. There had been few moments of deep conversation between them. For Kairai, sharp and composed by nature, to ask something so personal was rare. And it brought Rizai a quiet, indescribable sense of warmth. My dear son. There's nothing more to say than that, Rizai answered plainly and without hesitation. I believe you're a model for many. In a father's eyes, your devotion to the Lord has never wavered. You endure every hardship with unwavering resolve and carve your own path forward. That spirit. It fills me with pride. He paused, suddenly wondering if he'd gone too far. After all, the Lord's teachings caution against indulging in hollow praise. He turned, intending to ask if Kairai was satisfied with his answer. But his body froze before he could. 3 thin, razor-sharp blades had pierced through his back, driving cleanly through his heart and lungs. The precision left no doubt. It was a flawless kill. They were the Black Keys, the signature weapon of the executors of the Holy Church, equally effective in close combat and at a distance. And if imbued with special incantations, they could even paralyze a target temporarily. Kairai had done just that. Piercing the heart alone wasn't enough. Even as he lay dying, Rizai, once an executor himself, wouldn't be underestimated. Kairai wouldn't lower his guard until it was over. What's happening? Why would Kairai do this? There was no anger in Rizai's fading thoughts. Only a tidal wave of confusion. Blood gurgled from his throat as he struggled to breathe. Whoosh! The blades were withdrawn. His strength gone, Rizai Kotamin collapsed to his knees, then crumpled forward onto the floor. He stopped breathing as a pool of blood spread rapidly beneath him. Kairai looked down at his father, whose final moments were clouded in confusion and disbelief, and smiled with unrestrained joy. The thing his father and that woman had in common was their love for him. And both had misunderstood the core of who Kairai truly was. But unlike the illusion where he had killed his wife, the act of ending his father's life with his own hands, inflicting pain and bewilderment, filled Kairai with pure delight. The soul seeks pleasure, just as beasts are drawn to the scent of blood. No one could have foreseen what the Garden of Lost Will had awakened. Chapter 70, Betrayal at Dawn. Tokiomi Tasaka awoke. Although he'd long since developed a regular routine, he still couldn't shake his terrible morning temper. Not as bad as his daughter Rin's, though. The only one who knew about this was his wife. He didn't want Rin to find out. Otherwise, he'd never be able to act impressive in front of her again. In the future. The thought made Tokiomi feel both pleased and melancholic. The Holy Grail War could no longer continue. The family's long-cherished wish to reach the root would not be fulfilled in his generation. The next opportunity would come 60 years from now, and Rin wouldn't need to carry that burden. After rising, washing up, and dressing neatly, Tokiomi slipped back into his usual elegant demeanor. His thoughts turned to Tenkai Shiomi. 2 days ago, according to information relayed by Kairai's servant, Shiomi had taken the day off for Sakura and spent it out with her and Karin, enjoying the city. Rather than criticize Shiomi's lax approach to parenting, Tokiomi actually felt reassured. With a father like that raising Sakura, he felt increasingly at ease. I just wonder if Shiomi has that bad of a temper in the morning, Tokiomi joked to himself. But just as he reached the study door, preparing to contact Father Rizai and begin planning the purification of the Greater Grail, Kairai appeared in the corridor of the mansion. You're here, Kairai. Tokiomi didn't think much of it, assuming the old priest had sent Kairai to deliver a message. Since all parties had declared a ceasefire, he saw no reason to be wary of Kairai's sudden visit. He turned, opened the study door, and stepped inside, gesturing for Kairai to follow. Gilgamesh had already been waiting inside in spirit form. That freewheeling servant appearing wherever he pleased never surprised Tokiomi anymore. Tokiomi-sensei, may I speak with you for a moment? Kairai asked. What is it? Tokiomi paused and turned around. My father has passed away. Kairai reported it in his usual calm tone, making Tokiomi's pupils contract sharply. Father Rizai is dead? Tokiomi's composure shattered. He roared in disbelief, everyone's already agreed to a truce. Who would do something like this? Was it Garrett Suguemiya? That man had shown no shred of Amagas's pride from the beginning. Or was it Tenkai Shiomi? But compared to killing someone from the Holy Church, that young man, highly regarded by the Democratic Faction's Department of Creation at the Clock Tower, would understand the consequences better than anyone. Rather than provoke the Holy Church, he would have done something the Mages Association could tolerate. Like using the Holy Grail War as a legitimate excuse to decisively kill Kenneth, a lord of the aristocratic faction. That would have brought enough benefit to his faction and solidified his position within it. So who could it have been? Tokiomi had no answer. His anger gradually settled, and the composure to pursue the truth returned to his mind. Do you have any leads on this, Kyrai? He looked toward his disciple. Losing a father had to be more painful than losing a friend. So Tokiomi wanted to help his prized student seek revenge. No progress yet, Kyrai replied. But I actually came here to ask you for a favor, Tokiomi-sensei. Go ahead, Tokiomi answered without hesitation. For the sake of the Tasaka family, he would do everything he could to help Kyrai uncover the truth. I've secured the core of the Lesser Grail. But I lack a suitable vessel. What? Tokiomi froze at the completely unrelated statement. But he didn't have time to process it. His right hand, the one bearing the command spells, was suddenly severed, flying through the air. Kyrai had cut it off in one swift strike. A heavy blow to the abdomen followed, and before the pain could even register, Tokiomi lost consciousness and collapsed. What I want to borrow is your body as a magus, Tokiomi-sensei. Kyrai smiled with satisfaction. In the end, you never did understand my true nature, sensei. What a speechless man. Not content with killing his own father, and now he turns on his teacher too. A golden figure gradually materialized on the sofa. Without even glancing at Tokiomi, he coolly remarked on Kairai's actions. With his servant nearby, and never suspecting Gilgamesh's shift in allegiance, Tokiomi had dropped his guard entirely. After all, my teacher still had command spells. If he had activated one before losing consciousness, even the King of Heroes would have found that troublesome, Kyrai said indifferently. Well done. Gilgamesh smirked coldly as he looked at Kyrai. But right now, with only 2 servants' souls collected, the Grail can't be activated, can it? Should we have assassin self-terminate? Kyrai asked. Leave that shadow for now. It's weak, but with the right handling, it can serve as decent fodder. Gilgamesh stood up. Annoying as it is, let Tokiomi continue to act as my master and supply mana for the time being. Command spells were merely a way to formalize the contract. Even if they were exhausted, as long as the servant didn't sever the bond, the master-servant relationship could still function. And now that Tokiomi's command spell-bearing hand had been severed, he had no way to use them. Then let's leave the contract as is for now, King of Heroes. Kyrai revealed the command spells managed by the Holy Church etched onto his right arm. If needed, you can draw mana from these instead. Those were originally under his father's control. Even after death, they remained encrypted, making them impossible to extract directly. Oh? And how did you manage to acquire them? Gilgamesh, familiar with the secrets behind those command spells, seemed intrigued. Kotamin Kyrai let out a wicked smile. For that, I owe thanks to an old friend. He meant Tenkai Shiomi. During a mission they'd once carried out together, the target had resisted fiercely, and before he could be interrogated, Shiomi was forced to kill him. As a result, Shiomi taught Kyrai a special necromantic spell called Speak with Dead. According to Shiomi, the spell would only work properly if cast by someone other than the one who killed the deceased. So last night, Kyrai tried it on his dead father, just to see if it would work. To his surprise, it barely succeeded, producing a single brief response before failing. But one sentence was enough. From it, Kyrai learned how to access the command spells. Chapter 71, Strategy Meeting at the same time, at the Shiomi residence. Unlike their previous dramatic arrival in a bullock cart noble phantasm, Ryder and Waver came this time in a proper car. You're early. I thought you'd be here around noon. Shiomi teased as he opened the door for them. We came as soon as your familiar delivered the message, Waver said, lips pursed, clearly annoyed about being summoned so early. Forget that. What happened with Saber? Did you win or lose? As they followed Shiomi through the courtyard toward the house, Iskander brought up what was really on his mind. No conclusion, Shiomi replied with a helpless smile as he opened the door. Originally, since Saber's camp rejected the terms we discussed yesterday, we planned to either restrain them or force their servants to withdraw. But the strategy, which aimed to avoid bloodshed, went awry. A mistake? Waver looked puzzled. And that mistake is exactly why I called you here, Shiomi said, stepping into the entryway. After leading them into the room and taking their seats in the living room, they noticed Morgan had changed outfits. She was no longer wearing her modern shirt and skirt from a few days ago but had switched to a traditional Japanese-style blue kimono. The tea served had also been swapped. From black tea to a more fittingly Japanese gyokuro. But those were just surface details. Once seated, Shiomi gave Waver and Iskander a quick rundown of what had happened the previous night. First came curiosity, then surprise, and finally unease. Even just listening to Shiomi's account, Waver could already sense that the Holy Grail War was veering into unfathomable territory once again. Wait a second. Didn't your familiar's message say you'd gathered the other masters for a discussion? Thinking back to the battle report from the night before, Waver raised a critical question. Shiomi's familiar hadn't contacted just one person, it had sent messages to both Waver and Tokiomi simultaneously. The familiar I sent to contact Tokiomi wasn't accepted. It just vanished, Shiomi said calmly. Aside from Saber's camp, who fought us last night, I sent meeting requests to both you and Mr. Tokiomi. In the end, only you came. While it was likely that Tokiomi had been betrayed by his servant, considering Gilgamesh's behavior throughout the war, it was doubtful that Archer had ever felt any loyalty toward him. If anything, it was Tokiomi who needed Gilgamesh's power and had to show deference. So you're saying Tokiomi Tasaka turned down your request for a meeting? Waver asked, lifting his teacup. Iskander gave Waver a slap on the back, nearly causing him to scald his tongue with the hot tea. Now's not the time to play it safe. Judging by what this young man said, Archer's probably already abandoned his master. No. Betrayal might be too strong. He's more like disinterested. For a servant under contract with a master, turning traitor is no difficult task. Command seals and such become mere formalities. So, we have a few things we need to discuss first, Shiomi said bluntly, making his stance clear to Waver. If you're in, you're in. If not, then fine. Either way, Kairiko Tomine and Gilgamesh aren't going to stop. Whether they want the war to continue or plan to use the corrupted Greater Grail for something else, a ceasefire will probably only hold between our two groups. The Innsburn side hasn't made any moves to approach us yet, so we'll keep them on the watch list for now. In truth, after being hit by the Garden of Lost Will, everyone, Artawaria included, was mentally drained. The real wild card was Kairiko Tomine, who not only came out unscathed but acted swiftly, even trying to abduct the Lesser Grail vessel. Kid, you're the master. It's your call. Iskander placed a firm hand on Waver's shoulder. Normally bold and carefree, his tone this time carried unexpected weight, like a seasoned mentor offering guidance. In just a few days, Shiomi could already tell. Compared to the first night they met, Waver had grown noticeably steadier. Let's hear it. What's your plan? Waver asked, looking at Shiomi. In terms of combat and tactical skill as a magus, Shiomi far outclassed him. And with Lancer now defeated, it meant Shiomi had bested even Kenneth. Renowned as a prodigy and genius within the Mages Association, a place swarming with elites. That man was, after all, one of the lords of the clock tower. First, Shiomi began, raising a finger. Tokiomi Tasaka didn't respond to my familiar's message and let it vanish. That doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong. He might have just gone to the Holy Church early this morning. The Tasaka family are the administrators of Fuiuki, and purifying the Greater Grail is an urgent matter. But we can't rule out the possibility that something has happened to him. Once we're ready, we'll need to head to the Tasaka residence and check the situation. Right. He is a key figure, after all. Waver nodded, finding the reasoning sound. If it were him, he'd also want confirmation. Second, it's about Kairiko Tomine, Shiomi continued, frowning. You've probably noticed. Though he's participating in the Holy Grail War as Assassin's Master, Kairi is actually the son of Riziko Tomine, the overseer of the Holy Church. Iskander blinked in mild surprise. That old guy looks like he's 70 or 80, and his son's only in his 20s. A late-born child, huh? Probably. Shiomi gave a wry smile at the Conqueror King's unexpected focus. Given Alexander the Great died in his 30s, it wasn't too strange for him to find the age gap curious. Shiomi straightened up, getting back on track. So, the second place we need to visit is the Holy Church. I think it's necessary to go again and meet with that old priest. Of course, that was just the plan in an ideal scenario. Given Kairi's disturbing behavior last night, Shiomi couldn't help but assume the worst. That the man had embraced his true nature and fallen fully into darkness. If that were the case, then Rizai, the overseer who was supposedly sheltering him, might already be dead. Whether alive or not, no matter how likely it seemed, they had to confirm it themselves. So you're saying our two groups should split? One goes to the Tasaka residence, the other to the church. Waver was just about to confirm the plan when the doorbell rang. Chapter 72, Investigation Plan. Saber and Irisviel arrived, while Garrett Suguemiya, as always, remained out of sight, operating from the shadows. After ushering them inside, they saw Waver and Iskander already present, and couldn't help but be a bit surprised at how efficiently Shiomi had acted. Are your injuries alright? Shiomi asked courteously. Yes, Irisviel replied. Avalon is an incredibly powerful conceptual weapon. Just by being touched by its original wielder, Saber, my heart, though taken, began regenerating almost instantly. But as a consequence, you've lost your function as the Lesser Grail. Morgan, who had been silently listening, finally spoke up. Shiomi had already discussed everything with her in advance, so there was no need for her to repeat her opinions. But since this involved the Innsburn homunculus, which Shiomi wouldn't be able to explain in detail, Morgan took it upon herself to clarify. I began to realize that after I woke up, Iris Veal said, her expression difficult to read. Caught somewhere between relief and sadness. Shiomi sat back down. In the end, I bet Kairai never expected his malice would actually do something good. Joking aside, they needed to return to the matter at hand. Though a bit late, Shiomi quickly recapped what he discussed earlier for Artoria and Iris Veal. So, we need to reassess the situation at the Tosaka residence and the Fuiuki church. And determine whether Tokiomi Tosaka and the overseer are still alive? Iris Veal summarized. Given the current state of things, only Mr. Shiomi holds the initiative. We Innsburns agree to join in, especially considering the plan to purify the Greater Grail. Hearing her speak, Shiomi didn't feel the need to press further. He was confident Garrett Suguamiya wouldn't oppose it now. After experiencing the emotional whirlwind of losing and regaining his wife last night. On top of the Garden of Lost Will. Shiomi suspected Garrett Sugu had lost interest in pursuing the Grail, wanting only to bring this chaos to an end. Exactly. With the Innsburns now with us, it's 3 versus 2 in terms of servants. Shiomi gave a slight smile. Considering we're up against the King of Heroes, whose noble phantasms are countless, it's hard to say how much of an edge we truly have. But it's still something to be optimistic about. Everyone present silently agreed. And the last point we haven't discussed yet. We need to locate Kairai Kotomin. If Gilgamesh has already reformed a contract with him, then the two are undoubtedly acting together, Shiomi added. But that's for later. First, we follow through on the 2 initial plans. Iris Veal paused to think. Then Saber and I will head to the Tosaka estate, and for the church. But in your current condition, if a fight breaks out, you'll only become a burden to your servant, Shiomi interjected, dismissing her proposal. Leave the Tosaka residence to Waver and the King of Conquerors. As for the church, we'll repeat our approach from when we intercepted Castor. Saber and I will investigate, and Morgan will stay behind to guard the house. That way, Assassin won't be able to take advantage and try kidnapping the children as hostages. Though Morgan held the Berserker class, she possessed Castor class abilities in territory creation. Combined with the Shiomi family's established workshop, even the King of Heroes wouldn't easily breach their defenses. Of course, Shiomi's personal reason was simple: with Morgan protecting Sakura and Karin, he could head to the front lines without worry. You really do enjoy partnering with Artoria, don't you, my husband? Morgan suddenly asked. Shiomi pressed a hand to his forehead. Don't start with that now. You know why I need you holding the fort. I'm just teasing. Thought you could use a little laugh. Morgan gave a faint smile. Right now, both the priest and the King of Heroes are lurking in the dark. If things get critical, just use a command spell to summon me. Alright. Their slightly sentimental exchange lightened the tense mood. Led by Iskander, the others began to chuckle, even making the usually composed Shiomi feel a bit embarrassed. Only Morgan continued sipping her tea like nothing had happened. There's one more thing. Iris Veal spoke hesitantly. Go ahead, Shiomi said, just as he was about to make departure preparations. He sat back down. Iris Veal looked between him and Morgan, clearly troubled. Miss Mia still hasn't woken up. It seems she was also affected by that large-scale magecraft last night. Morgan's expression shifted slightly in surprise. After all, the effects of the Garden of Lost Will had already been dispelled. For her to still be unconscious, there could only be one explanation. That cold, emotionally detached assistant had been completely overwhelmed by the Garden of Lost Will. If it's alright, have her brought here. Let Morgan examine her personally, Shiomi said, casting an inquiring look at Morgan. After she gave a slight nod, he continued. With their approval, Iris Veal's expression finally eased a little. She'd spent a long time last night speaking with Garrett Sugu. About the Holy Grail War, about their ideals, and about their daughter, Ilya. Everything. Garrett Sugu had made his decision. Iris Veal knew it was painful for him, but had he chosen otherwise, he might have faced a far deeper, lifelong regret. By the way, Waver Velvet, Shiomi said as he stood, remembering something he'd forgotten earlier. You didn't run into anyone using magecraft to attack you, did you? Like, say, someone controlling insects? Waver looked puzzled. Magecraft that uses insects? No, I don't think so. Though not an exceptional magus, he wasn't clueless about magecraft either. If nothing happened, that's good. The Matu family is the only one of the 3 founding families not participating in this Holy Grail War. Their head has been moving behind the scenes, Shiomi informed them seriously. Since his intentions are unclear, I hope you'll all stay alert. Iris Veal nodded quietly. Recalling the intelligence Garrett Sugu had gathered on the various factions in Fuiuki, the Matu family, as one of the 3 core families, had always warranted special attention. The Matu family has no heir. They might be trying to cheat their way forward since they can't find a proper solution. Shiomi, also aware of this, gave the group this final reminder before they set out. And with that, he made up his mind to find an opportunity soon to pay Skinman a personal visit. Chapter 73, The Empty Church. Since receiving the command spell and being forced into the Holy Grail War, Tenkai Shiomi had spent the past 2 years thoroughly investigating every corner of Fuyuki City. From the state of its ley lines to the Magus families that had lived there for generations. Tasaka, Matu, and the Innsburn, with their immovable castle deep in the forest. Shiomi had studied everything within his reach. The Holy Church, as one of the potential sites for the Grail's descent and with a history of spiritual summoning, naturally demanded extra attention. But today, the church, already known for its stillness, felt even more desolate than usual. Shiomi could sense something was off. And it wasn't just the midwinter chill. After casting a detection spell to survey the area, Shiomi exchanged a nod with Artoria. Only then did they push open the door and step inside, advancing cautiously. By the way, during the strategy meeting before we left, you sounded like you knew that man, Kairiko Tamin? Artoria asked as they walked down the path through the courtyard toward the chapel entrance. As a magus from the Mages Association, I've been assigned to tasks that required working with the Holy Church, Shiomi replied without hesitation. Kairiko Tamin was one of the executors I worked with back then. Now was no time for evasiveness. Being vague would only create cracks in an already fragile alliance. Something that would no doubt benefit Kairai and Gilgamesh. I see, Artoria nodded. The Magus community wasn't particularly large or small, but living in society's shadows and dealing with mystery daily. Especially among fellow Easterners. It wasn't unusual to cross paths. That said, I don't know him well. It was strictly professional, Shiomi continued. As far as strength goes, Kairai's among the top executors. Artoria looked at him as he pushed open the door. But compared to you, a magus who can take on a servant alone, he's still a step behind, right? I'm an anomaly, Shiomi said with a faint, helpless smile. The chapel's interior was exactly the same. Unchanged from yesterday, or even 2 years ago. What about you, Saber? Shiomi asked. Maybe it's just me, but you seem less conflicted today. Artoria scanned the chapel carefully, alert for nearby presences. I have the two of you to thank for that. She turned to Shiomi. That magecraft. Was it yours, or my sister's doing? What do you think? Shiomi crouched and checked beneath the altar. Spotless. Not even a speck of dust. It must have been my sister's, Artoria said. She didn't know Morgan well enough to identify the exact type of magecraft, but the fact that even her A-rank magic resistance had been bypassed so easily made it clear Morgan was behind it. Most likely, during their last visit to the castle, Morgan had quietly left something behind. Something that came in handy later. Finding nothing unusual in the chapel, they moved into the church's rear section. Shiomi wasn't too familiar with the church's layout, but he knew that the back housed administrative offices and living quarters for the staff. Rumor had it there was also a sanctum 5 meters underground. Larger than the chapel itself. He assumed the above-ground space served the public, while the underground sanctum was used for the church's secret rites. That, however, was secondary. As soon as they stepped into the dim corridor of the back offices, the sharp scent of blood hit them. Neither Shiomi, a seasoned magus, nor Artoria, a battle-hardened servant, was the type to flinch at the sight. Or smell. Of blood. But this made it clear, things had gone just as badly as Shiomi feared. They pushed open a half-closed office door and were met with a large pool of blood soaking most of the carpet. In the cold, poorly ventilated winter air, Shiomi's illumination spell revealed that the blood was still visibly wet. What is this? Artoria frowned. Shiomi crouched down to inspect it. Judging from the bloodstains and the time of year, the death couldn't have occurred more than 5 hours ago. Is it the overseer's blood? Most likely. And it looks like the body was moved before they had time to clean up the scene, Shiomi said quietly. Father Rizaiko Tamin was once an executor for the Holy Church. The only one who could have killed him so easily, without raising his guard, would be someone he trusted completely. His own son. He stood and took a few steps back, with Artoria stepping aside as well. Shiomi raised his hand. Mana flowed through his magic circuits, then quietly dispersed. A pale blue light spread across the bloodstains. After a moment, particles of light began to rise, gradually forming the shape of a person. Even as a silhouette, it was unmistakably Rizaiko Tamin. The figure first appeared standing, then suddenly froze. And finally collapsed to its knees, falling forward. The sequence looped, like a video stuck on repeat. Magecraft that shows a person's final moments? Artoria asked. Is it some form of necromancy? It's not necromancy, Shiomi replied, crossing his arms. If the body's present, and the conditions are right, it can sometimes even reveal the killer's outline. Though, I doubt that would help much in this case. Artoria nodded. From the way he collapsed, it's clear he was caught off guard. Someone came up from behind. She placed a hand against Shiomi's back to demonstrate. Stabbed him with a weapon, fatally. He died on the spot. Was the demonstration really necessary? Shiomi grimaced. Artoria gave a self-assured smile. Call it a little payback for you and my sister launching that nighttime assault. Next time, attack head-on. Pretty sure there won't be a next time. Shiomi moved past her and began searching the room. Aside from Holy Church documents, there were only files related to the Holy Grail War. To be safe, Shiomi combed through them carefully, but nothing worth taking stood out. With Riziko Tomine confirmed dead, the next step was to determine Tokyomi's whereabouts. After that, they could begin tracking down Kairiko Tomine and Gilgamesh. Shiomi explained this to Artoria, and the two turned to leave the church. Chapter 74, Encounter Battle, 1. Though this might not be the best time, may I ask you a question, Shiomi? As they stepped outside toward the chapel, Artoria spoke up. Depends on the question. If it's about my magecraft or trump cards, I'm afraid I can't answer, Shiomi replied with a natural, matter-of-fact expression. I understand that, as a magus, one must always conceal their roots. Artoria shook her head. What I want to ask is about my sister, the queen. Shiomi raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the topic. Go ahead. After he gave his permission, Artoria let out a quiet breath. Is that Morgan truly the Morgan I know? The question left Shiomi momentarily puzzled. It wasn't an inquiry into a servant's stats, nor simple curiosity about private matters. It was something much simpler. Was she really who she appeared to be? I'm not quite sure what you mean, Shiomi said, standing in a beam of sunlight streaming through the chapel window. Sorry, I didn't phrase that well, Artoria apologized sincerely. It's just that, from our first battle with Morgan, through our uneasy cooperation, and everything that followed, there was no doubt she was Morgan. Even Artoria couldn't imagine anyone impersonating her. But there was still something different. Close, but not quite the same. Her instincts, always sharp, nudged at the uncertainty, compelling her to ask Morgan's master directly. Shiomi paused before replying. I have 2 questions for you as well. Please. Morgan looks a lot like you. When she was a young girl, did she look exactly like you do now? Artoria furrowed her brows. I was adopted by Sir Ector from birth. Until I pulled the Sword of Selection at 15 and became king, I hardly ever saw my sister. Then, the second question. Shiomi turned to look at her. In your time, was there a place in Britannia called the Land of Rain? This question confused Artoria even more. It's true that Britannia had frequent rain. You could say the whole country was a land of rain. But I've never heard of a specific place called that. I see. Shiomi's expression began to settle into understanding. Still, perhaps because she rarely spoke about Britannian geography, Artoria added, speaking of rain, I remember there was a group of islands called Orkney in the northern seas during my time. It was said to rain year-round there. I only stationed near it once or twice for politics or military campaigns, but during that time, the rain never let up. Shiomi gave a quiet nod and thanked her. Thank you. Some things are best confirmed with someone from that era. I'm glad I could help. As for Morgan, Shiomi paused to think, she is who she is. Please don't overthink it. At the very least, she wouldn't betray us. Artoria chuckled softly. I understand. Since you trust her so deeply, I won't press the matter. Just forget I asked. Saber took Shiomi's words as a defense of Morgan. He meant to clarify, but just as he stepped toward the chapel door and placed his hand on it, he felt a presence from outside. An overwhelming pressure colder than winter itself. His heart tightened. Artoria instantly shifted from conversation to readiness, taking position with Shiomi on either side of the door. They reached out and slowly pushed the chapel doors open a crack. A golden figure, haughty and imperious, stood in the open doorway. Wearing no golden armor, yet unmistakably radiant. Gilgamesh. They both recognized him at once, and Artoria instinctively shifted into battle mode. It doesn't look like this was just a random ambush, Shiomi said, glancing at Artoria. In other words, slipping out the back before he fully appears isn't an option. She nodded in agreement. There's one servant here, and a master who can match a servant. If we work together, we should be able to retreat for now. With everyone's true names exposed, Gilgamesh's noble phantasm remained the only unknown. The treasury filled with countless noble phantasms might be his noble phantasm. But what comes after that? Just like the other servants, He must have a trump card he hasn't revealed yet. The plan had been to track Kairi and the King of Heroes, then launch a surprise attack together. But the enemy clearly had no intention of waiting. They'd already made the first move. So now the only question is, who exactly is he after? Xiaomi extended his hand, and a red spear materialized in his grasp. Artoria blinked in surprise. Is that a noble phantasm? He wasn't a servant, yet he wielded a noble phantasm. Could he, like Kairi and the others, have found something passed down from the past in this era? That's a question for later. Let's go. After a brief exchange of glances, the two pushed open the chapel doors and stepped outside. Oh? So it's just like Kairi said. You came to the church sniffing for intel. Gilgamesh stood there with one hand casually in his pocket. Saber. And the God Slayer. As his words fell, over a dozen golden portals opened around him, each revealing the prototype of a different noble phantasm. This place is too open. Not ideal for facing long-range flying weapons, Xiaomi muttered as he glanced toward the wooded area beside the church. Let's use the first wave to draw him toward those trees. Understood. Be careful. Artoria gripped her invisible sword, silently weighing whether it was time to unleash her noble phantasm's true name. For some reason, the thought of Tenkai Xiaomi dying here made her uneasy. She didn't know how she'd face Morgan afterward. Even though, not even for a day had she ever interacted with that person as a sister, or as siblings. Whatever. It might be early, but with only 2 servants left, we need at least 1 or 2 more to disappear before that thing can activate. Gilgamesh raised his hand, and the noble phantasms extended a little further from the portals. If you don't want to die, struggle with everything you've got, mongrels. With a casual flick of his left hand, the weapons rained down on them like a storm. Explosions rocked the ground, a thick cloud of smoke rising and engulfing Xiaomi and Artoria. Gilgamesh stood unmoved, as if disappointed that such an attack could be enough to end it. Suddenly, a spinning sickle sliced through the smoke. Aimed straight at him. Chapter 75, Encounter Battle, 2, This was a probing strike. Xiaomi used his red spear to catch and hurl back one of Gilgamesh's launched noble phantasms, the prototype weapon known as Harp, attempting to restrain him. As expected, the sickle was blocked by one of Gilgamesh's other noble phantasms. As the smoke quickly dispersed in the wind, Gilgamesh spotted the 2 of them retreating toward the forest beside the church. Realizing you can't win, so now you want to run into the woods? He sneered to himself. Well, hunting is more entertaining when you chase your prey down. A single, clean kill is far too dull. He strolled after them at a leisurely pace, following the path they'd taken into the forest. This area was scattered with graveyards. Most of the devout citizens were buried here in accordance with their faith. As he walked the paths of this death-scented cemetery, Gilgamesh thought it a fitting burial ground for Xiaomi and Saber. Not that servants left behind corpses when they died. Xiaomi burst out first, weaving rapidly between the gravestones with astonishing speed. In terms of sheer velocity, he already surpassed Kairi by a wide margin. So this is what it looks like to reach the realm of heroic spirits while still human, Gilgamesh remarked coolly. But speed alone isn't enough. Alongside his words, he unleashed a volley of noble phantasms. Yet Xiaomi darted and twisted through the gravestones, using them as cover and barriers, making it difficult for Gilgamesh to get a clear shot. Most of the weapons were deflected or shattered against the stones. The 10-meter gap between them vanished in an instant. Xiaomi lunged forward, thrusting the red spear. Only for it to be parried by a casually wielded black and red short sword before reaching its target. Sensing danger, Xiaomi instantly pulled back. That weapon. It carries a curse of vengeance, he muttered, shifting into a ready stance for a second assault. At that moment, Gilgamesh drew a gleaming silver dagger and lazily slashed through the air. A sudden, biting wind surged toward Xiaomi. Reacting instantly, Xiaomi summoned a counter wind to meet the incoming attack. Though the chill didn't touch him directly, he saw the very air around him crystallize into icicles. Everything caught within the vacuum wave was frozen solid. Its destructive force rivaled even his own high-tier magecraft, Great Ice Age. Taking advantage of Gilgamesh's diverted focus, Artoria sprang from the trees and slashed at the golden servant with her blade. But a massive sword, so large it seemed made for a giant, came crashing down to block her path, cutting her off mid-attack. Another sword of similar size, but different in shape, descended toward Xiaomi. He narrowly dodged the vertical strike, using its weight and momentum to flip upward, sprinting along the blade to launch himself into the air. Quickly reaching a height of 10 meters above the ground. Take this. The red spear tore through the air, flying straight at Gilgamesh. He wasn't wearing his armor. This might be their best chance. Gilgamesh raised an eyebrow. That spear, huh? A golden gate opened, launching a noble phantasm nearly identical to Xiaomi's. The two spears clashed midair, neutralizing each other. Xiaomi caught the rebounding spear, flipped several times in the air, and landed lightly just behind Artoria. Of course he has won too, Xiaomi muttered with a wry smile. Realizing that a standard assault wouldn't work, even with terrain on their side, Artoria took advantage of the distraction and released the invisible air. Xiaomi's strike was merely a feint. The real blow was coming now. Winds surged around her, forming a spiraling vortex that trapped her in a protective storm. Then, the golden sword revealed itself. Gilgamesh's amused smirk slowly vanished. So that's the legendary holy sword, forged in the planet's inner sea? Gilgamesh remained composed. Perfect. Let me draw something worthy to test your mettle. He raised his hand, and from the golden gate emerged a bizarre noble phantasm. So strange, one could barely call it a sword. It was cylindrical in shape, composed of three blade-like segments, each rotating in a different direction. Even without its true name, Xiaomi understood the symbolism in its form. Heaven. Earth. The underworld. Together, they represented the cosmos. A noble phantasm duel, huh? Artoria didn't flinch. Her magical energy surged to its peak as she prepared to unleash her noble phantasm's true name. It's your turn, EA, Gilgamesh said coldly. X. Without the slightest hesitation, the King of Knights raised her sword. A blade that could cleave earth and river in a single swing. And struck. Caliber. Inuma Elish. Two voices, one burning with resolve, the other chilling and absolute, overlapped. Blinding light flared, and the pressure that followed made it hard to even breathe. We'll lose. Xiaomi had already seen the outcome of this clash. 13th Primordial Rune, Rune of Protection. There could be no hesitation. He didn't know how much of EA's unleashed power his runes could withstand. But if he did nothing, Artoria would be critically wounded, and he would be caught in the blast. Gilgamesh clearly intended to annihilate both him and Saber with a single blow. What surged toward them was like the hellscape of creation's dawn, where life and death blurred into one. Xiaomi gripped his spear tightly, forcing every last ounce of magic through his circuits. Anchoring himself with the 13th Primordial Rune, he unleashed all 18, casting a full-scale protective spell. He didn't know how long it lasted. Perhaps just a few seconds. But the clash of those two swords felt like it could tear the world apart. Ha! Both he and the King of Knights shouted with all their might. When the storm finally died down, the graveyard behind the church was reduced to ruins, the surrounding trees sheared clean at the waist. The land itself looked like it had suffered a divine calamity. Gilgamesh withdrew EA, casting a smug, approving glance at Tenkai Xiaomi. And the barely conscious Artoria in his arms. She clutched her holy sword, coughing violently, blood spilling from her mouth. Only Xiaomi's support kept her standing. Xiaomi, leaning on his red spear, was equally battered. His injuries were no less severe than Saber's. One eye was sealed shut with blood. But the other still stared fiercely at Gilgamesh. Oh? The King of Heroes gave a rare note of admiration. To defy even death. Well done. Xiaomi yanked his spear from the ground, holding it upright with one hand, barely managing to stay on his feet. Thunder rumbled in the heavens as Gilgamesh brushed dust from his clothes. Then as a reward, I'll let you live for today. Next time, I'll personally sever your head as a mark of honor. With a laugh drenched in arrogance, Gilgamesh vanished into spirit form. And from the sky descended the King of Conquerors, mounted atop his noble phantasm. Chapter 76, Regrouping Archer, Gilgamesh, withdrew on his own, claiming he'd had his fun. Rider, Iskander, raced over from the Tasaka residence in Mama Town, driving his noble phantasm. Back when the battle with Gilgamesh first broke out, Xiaomi and Artoria had already retreated into the forest and activated a magical communication device. It was a small tool crafted by Morgan before they set out. Just a tiny bit of mana was enough to trigger it, alerting the other party. No matter how far away. That something urgent had happened and help was needed. That said, from the sheer magnitude of the mana surge when the Excalibur clashed with Inuma Elish, Xiaomi figured Morgan, back at home, had probably sensed it too. When he saw the familiar ox cart descending slowly and caught sight of Iskander and Waver aboard, Xiaomi finally let out a breath of relief. His grip loosened, and Artoria slipped from his arms. He hurried to catch her, and the two of them collapsed to the ground together. He had already spent the last of his strength. Even though Iskander arrived quickly, Xiaomi had been about to use a command spell to summon Morgan. Hey, kid, can you still hold on? Ryder asked seriously as he jumped off the cart. I'm fine. It's not too bad, Xiaomi replied quietly, putting away his red spear. Ryder didn't waste time. Hey, kid. You can use healing magecraft, right? Well. Waver looked awkward. His magecraft skills weren't yet good enough for proper healing spells. A minor cut or scrape was doable, But Shiomi was covered in injuries and looked like he was on the verge of collapse. That was way beyond what Waver could handle. "It's fine. I've got this," Shiomi said, raising a hand to stop him. As if to prove it, the runes on his body began to glow, and his external wounds started healing at a pace visible to the naked eye. Waver guessed that within another minute or two, Shiomi's internal and external injuries would be fully healed. Still, this kind of self-activated healing spell couldn't compare to the efficiency of a magic crest passed down through a Magus family. "Seriously? If you had a trump card, you could have said so. Got us worried for nothing," Waver grumbled, arms crossed now that things had calmed down. Shiomi just gave a silent smile as Waver got a light smack on the head from Ryder. "I'm fine, but Saber's not in great shape," Shiomi added. "No. I'm all right," Artoria said, her eyes dim. She tried to speak evenly, even politely, but her voice was clearly weak. "Thanks to your magecraft." She had been the main force in the Noble Phantasm clash, but if Shiomi hadn't acted in time to deploy a defensive spell and reduce the impact of Gilgamesh's attack, her injuries would have been far worse. "This isn't the time to act tough," Shiomi sighed. "I'll use runes to treat you for now. Your spirit core isn't damaged, but since you can't go spirit form to recover, we'll have to deal with the rest back home." "Thank you," Artoria said with a faint smile before closing her eyes to receive the healing, conserving her strength. With both of them stabilizing, Ryder and Waver finally relaxed. The moment they got the emergency signal, they'd rushed from the Tasaka residence using Ryder's Noble Phantasm, fully expecting to face off against Gilgamesh in a brutal fight. But it really is strange. Gold Glitter actually ran off on his own? Iskander didn't think the guy was deliberately avoiding a fight. "I thought we'd end up using our Noble Phantasms to go head-to-head. Who knows? Archer always does whatever he wants and tends to underestimate his opponents," Shiomi offered his thoughts. "Maybe he thought it wasn't worth it and wants to wait until we're back in peak condition to take us all out in one go." Waver pursed his lips. "Not sure if that counts as arrogance or something else. Either way, we've come up empty on our end. All we know is that the church's overseer, Riziko Tamine, was killed," Shiomi said, using the healing downtime to share intel. From the looks of the scene, it was likely someone he trusted who struck him from behind while he was completely off guard. Still, Shiomi hadn't expected Kairiko Tamine to actually commit patricide. But now he understood. If they didn't stop Kairi, the situation would only spiral further once the tainted Holy Grail ended up in his hands. "Same on our side. No sign of that Tokiomi Tasaka guy," Ryder said, stroking his beard. Waver, leaning on the ox cart, added, "But the Tasaka family's barrier was practically inactive. Whoever maintained it must have been taken away. We searched every room and only found a small blood stain in the study. Judging by the amount of blood, it definitely wasn't fatal," Ryder noted. "If someone meant to kill him, they wouldn't clean up right after. Looks like they stopped the bleeding immediately after striking. For a servant familiar with the sight of blood, judging whether a victim died on the spot wasn't hard." "Then Tokiomi Tasaka is probably still alive," Shiomi said, recalling what Kairi had mentioned the night before at Innsburn Castle. "He took the core of the Innsburn Lesser Grail, saying that as long as he had the core, it didn't matter what happened to the vessel." Waver's expression shifted. "You mean Tokiomi Tasaka was used as the core of the Holy Grail?" "I'm afraid so." Shiomi nodded. As the treatment wrapped up, he had mostly recovered, and Artoria's condition had stabilized as well. "We'll need to squeeze into Ryder's ox cart for the trip back," Shiomi said. "No problem." Artoria, never one to seek comfort, naturally accepted the situation. The King of Conquerors proudly patted the cart's front seat. "Don't let the cramped space fool you. Once this baby takes off, it's better than any modern ride." Shiomi gave a quiet smile and moved to lift Artoria, who quickly tried to push him away. "I can walk on my own. Besides, what kind of ruler lets themselves be carried like that?" "As a ruler, you should listen to your physician," Shiomi said. "You're more badly hurt than I am, King of Knights." One sentence was all it took to silence her. Artoria reluctantly let Shiomi carry her up onto the cart. Ryder watched, clearly amused. "You're pretty good with women." "No, I'm just good with kings," Shiomi replied as he settled Artoria onto the cart. Though not serving as her vassal, he had spent more years by that queen's side than he could count. Chapter 77, Embracing the Witch. After returning to the Shiomi residence, Artoria was temporarily placed in a guest room, with Ira keeping her company. Meanwhile, Shiomi, changing clothes in his room, found the whole situation oddly amusing. Just last night, Iri was the one who needed looking after. Now, in a sudden reversal, she was the one tending to Artoria. Was this what they meant by the king's carriage has changed hands? After stripping off his torn, blood-stained clothes and tossing them into the trash, Shiomi noticed Morgan was already sitting in the room. He hadn't even realized when she arrived, but she didn't look well. Just to be clear, Artoria Pendragon was injured by Gilgamesh's noble phantasm. That thing's his ace. It even overpowered the holy sword. Shiomi raised his hand slightly. I was just. Morgan gave a faint smile, feigning puzzlement. Do you really think I'm that jealous of a woman? Shiomi considered replying, aren't you? But for the sake of his own survival, he wisely stayed silent. In any case, the fact that they attacked in broad daylight shows they're no longer bothering to conceal the supernatural, Morgan said. When I sensed your battle, I thought the final showdown had already begun. Looks like they're not quite ready yet. Shiomi nodded. One thing's for sure after this morning. If anyone's going to stop Gilgamesh, Kairiko Tamine, and that tainted Holy Grail, it'll have to be us. That's not all. The Innsburn homunculus received word that nothing seems out of place at the Civic Hall in Shinto. But Rita Temple on Mount Enzo? They're preparing some kind of large-scale ritual, Morgan added. 3 of the 4 ley lines in Fuiuki had now been fully confirmed. If Kairi intended to forcibly activate the Greater Grail and fend off interfering servants, his only viable location would be the Greater Grail site at Mount Enzu. That place already had a spirit barrier set up. Any servant trying to break in would have to come through the front gate. And if Gilgamesh were defending from atop the mountain gate, already having the high ground and a strategic advantage, the situation would become even more difficult to handle. But that was a problem for later. Right now, Shiomi was more concerned about something else. Then why do you look unwell? If it wasn't jealousy over Artoria, then something else was bothering her. It's nothing. I just saw a glimpse of her past when treating Innsburn's assistant, Morgan said with a small shake of her head. Mihisar had collapsed too quickly inside the Garden of Lost Will, and hadn't regained consciousness even after the magecraft had been dispelled. Still, it was a fairly simple matter for Morgan. She used a bit of magic to interfere with Mia's unconscious mind, resealing the memories that had awakened in the garden. Once that was done, Mia began to show signs of waking up. I see, Shiomi said, a little surprised. Morgan leaned gently against him. He didn't pull away. People can be so cruel to one another sometimes, she said quietly, not wanting to recount what she had just witnessed. Shiomi sensed the heaviness in her voice. He couldn't help but question himself. Was it really right to trouble Morgan with things like this right now? I won't deny it. But even so, he said, embracing her. It was the first time he'd ever held his servant like this outside the battlefield. He didn't think of Morgan as a familiar, but as a masterclass magus of the Age of Gods. A heroic spirit etched into legend. As for treating her as a woman, that felt presumptuous. Even knowing she was female, even sensing that Morgan might feel something more than duty toward him. Something that went beyond what a servant felt for their master. Even so, I still believe this human world is beautiful. Something worth protecting, Shiomi said sincerely to Morgan, though he didn't expect her to share the sentiment. I know. It's just. I've always harbored a bit of fantasy about the unknown world, Morgan replied. Because I only saw it in passing. Because it's the world you live in, so she had ended up placing unrealistic hopes on the world he had always lived in. The world that, over 6,000 years, had never once turned its back on her. Naive thoughts she should have long since abandoned had resurfaced the moment she laid eyes on it. I see. That must have been tough on you, Shiomi said softly, understanding her. Without realizing it, Morgan leaned a little deeper into him. How are your injuries? But the faint scent of blood still lingering brought her back to her senses.